attitude well.
A battle in the heart of Alabama caught our attention. Coal miners in one community, they've been on strike now for months.
Working as long as 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, in some of the most dangerous conditions.
I really think that the labor movement is the single greatest force for democracy in the history of the United States.
The story of Alabama is a story of not just resilience, but of militancy.
I say no contract, you say no code. No contract, no contract.
If we ain't all free, ain't none of us free.
You're listening to Alabama's only union talk radio show, The Valley Labor Report, with Adam Keller and Jacob Morrison.
Hello, Tennessee Valley. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host and fellow agitator Adam Keller, and we are broadcasting live, online, and on the radio from the heart of the Tennessee Valley, the Spice Radio studio in Huntsville, Alabama. Today, we talk about the South with Adolph Reed Jr. Alabama's legislative session is almost over, so what's the damage? Amazon fired Jennifer Bates, probably the most prominent Amazon union organizer, second only to Chris Smalls. All that and more on today's program. If you want to be part of the show today, we've got a phone number and the line is open. You can call or text 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. You can also send us a message or leave us a voicemail throughout the week, and we might play it on the next show. So that is an option as well if you don't want to call in and be live on the air. If you haven't gotten enough of us by the time that we wrap up here on the radio, or if you just want to see what we're up to throughout the week, because we continue putting stuff out throughout the week. We release new articles, new reporting, new commentary, stuff like that. So if you want to keep up with us throughout the week, the best place to do that is on our website, TVLR.fm. It is union-made. It is a union-made website. We're very proud of that. And it's got lots of good stuff on it. We are working on a piece that's going to probably drop on Monday of the reaction of Alabama unions to the Glacier case. So you're going to want to check that out. And you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm. Make sure that you bookmark it. Make sure that you sign up for our newsletter so that you get our daily email. Shows you what we've been up to that day. You can also find us anywhere you find anything else online. We're on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, TikTok, wherever you get your podcasts, all at the Valley Labor Report. Just a reminder, your support helps us stay on the air. Our largest single source of funding comes directly from our listeners. So if you want to become a sustaining donor to the program, make a one-time donation, kind of like a tip for a particularly good segment or episode, or buy our merch. We still have some of our new t-shirts, and we always have stickers in-house. You can do that on our website, tvlr.fm/store and tvlr.fm/donate. You can also become a patron at patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report. If you're a member of a union, then you should think about getting your local to sponsor the show. Our local sponsors are very important to continuing to make the show sustainable. As well as our regional and international union sponsors, local progressive groups, and also open to, local businesses and stuff that are interested in talking to our audience. So hit us up if you want to advertise on the show or you just want to support. You can reach out to us for more details on our advertiser packages.
Absolutely. Thank you for all who contribute whatever, format that comes in. We really do appreciate it. Let me add a disclaimer that any viewpoints or opinions expressed in this program belong solely to their author and do not necessarily represent any organization or sponsor. We welcome all of our listeners, whether you're on YouTube, Facebook, WVNN, WZZA, WHIV, or through your favorite podcast app. And we are proud to be part of the Labor Radio Podcast Network and encourage our listeners to check it out.
Absolutely. So, first up, let's talk about this debt deal. We'll get to that before we talk to Adolph Reed Jr. Really excited for that conversation later on in the show. He's coming on at 9:45, right? That's
right
when we have him scheduled. Great. So, yeah, yesterday, the debt limit deal was signed by the president, is my understanding. And, before we dive into what that means, it's really important to understand that none of this charade was necessary. The president did not have to pretend that he was bound by the debt limit. That was totally an unnecessary political theater. Now, of course, they would have had to go through a budget negotiation at some point, but that's totally different than this pressure that the president pretended was on him. The executive branch is obligated by the Constitution to pay debts that he is directed to pay by Congress. So, in order to buy, and there is a law that says that there's a debt limit and the president can't spend over this debt limit. And so, in order to abide by that law, he would have to violate the Constitution in one way or another. Either he would just totally stop paying debts, paying for services that Congress ordered him to pay, right, in previous budgets and previous laws that they passed. He's been ordered to pay that, or he would have to, as the executive branch, decide what he pays and what he doesn't, which amounts to a line item veto, which the Supreme Court has also said is unconstitutional, right? So, to abide by the debt limit, he would have to violate the Constitution. And that's the end of it. That's the end of it. And that's a fact. You cannot argue against that. To abide by the debt limit, in the case where Congress authorizes spending above the debt limit, he would have to violate the Constitution of the United States. So this is all not necessary. It's political theater. It's kabuki. It's fake. The debt limit is fake. It's unconstitutional.
Right. Yeah. I think it's important that you open there because President Biden did have options beyond this hostage negotiation process that Republicans love to engage in. You had the 14th Amendment. You have the possibility of minting the $1 trillion coin that I know folks have talked about, economists have talked about for quite some time. There were plenty of options. Also, let's remember that Democrats did hold a majority in Congress, and Bernie Sanders was one of the individuals who tried to get them to go ahead and take care of this debt limit back in, I believe it was December.
Right.
And, unfortunately, there were people such as, Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema, those types who, resisted, and so they couldn't get the votes.
Yeah, well, and another group that has been agitating against the authority of the debt limit is a federal employee union, the SEIU's federal employee union, the National Association of Government Employees, and they are actually in court right now alleging that the debt limit is unconstitutional, and they say that they have standing because because theoretically, right, the debt limit was supposed to have been reached in January. So we're well past when it was supposed to have been reached, but Janet Yellen and the Treasury Department have been playing these weird games, and one of the weird games that they've been playing is keeping cash on hand that is supposed to be going into federal employee pension funds. And now Janet Yellen and the Treasury Department says, oh, well, this money is going to go into the pension funds later as soon as this debt limit deal is resolved. But what happens in the interim, because we understand how interest works, right? What happens in the interim is that the pension funds do not increase in value in the same way that they would have had the deposits been made in a timely fashion, in the time frame in which they were supposed to have been put in the pension funds. And so federal employees were directly harmed by this, this BS, this fake nonsense. And so they allege that it's unconstitutional. And the Biden administration could have gone on the side of the plaintiff. They could have gone on record and said, you know what? The National Association of Government Employees is correct. We do believe the debt limit is constitutional. And you could have had potentially a federal court issue a ruling saying as much. And then you could have gone to the Republicans and said, look, a federal court said it's unconstitutional. My hands are tied. Let's just get on with budget negotiation. But he didn't do that. He abstained from that. And so this is, it's absurd. It is absolutely absurd that the president and the Democrats are pretending that the debt limit is functional, because it's not. It's unconstitutional. But okay, so all of that preamble aside, let's take a look at it. What are the broad strokes of the debt limit? Well, because defense and the military-industrial complex is magic, it is exempt and will continue to grow, which is weird because my understanding previously had been that they were going to cut the woke out of the military. And, I figured that there would be at least some woke in the military that you could cut in the budget, But apparently what happened is Republicans, they searched line item through the Defense Department and said, you know what, actually we can't find any woke to cut. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to give you a raise instead of cutting. I've also been told that the Republicans are the new anti-war party. That's
really?
Something else that I've been told. Yeah, that's another
News
thing.
to me.
That's another thing that I've been told, but instead of that, they are voting to increase defense spending yet again. While everything else is capped at fiscal year 23 levels. Now, to be sure, this is better than the original Republican proposal, which, let's remember, was a 22% cut across the board, again, to everything except defense, which was bad, which was very bad, would have been very bad. But when you cap spending, when you freeze spending, particularly in a relatively high inflation environment, that means spending cuts. David Dayen puts it well in The American Prospect, saying that it will only be a little bit easier in the coming years to commit wage theft or to sell defective or poisoned products. It will only be a little harder to get rental assistance or tuition support. Only a few people will be freer to pollute the environment. Only a few will find it more difficult to get food. The Internal Revenue Service will only be a little worse, and a lot of things will stay the same. Almost nothing will get any better. So that's the deal. That's the thing that both sides could agree on. A little bit worse, nothing better. That's the thing. Could have been worse, but it's not good. Both sides are going to say it's not good, but it's worth taking a look at why both sides say it's not good, because I think it is revelatory.
Well, and I do want to push back just a sec to say that the Biden administration, I don't know, I've seen folks taking a victory leap here on behalf of Biden to say that he is some master negotiator and that this is just a hell of a deal. And so
you're right. When I say both sides, I mean the right of the Republican Party and the left of the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
Okay? So,
right.
But
the centrists got what they wanted, basically.
Yes. Yeah. So the Kevin McCarthy's and the Bidens are going to say that this is a good deal. Look at how compromised and professional we are. Wow, we. Right. But the right and the left, in broad strokes, are saying that this is a bad deal. So let's take a look at why they say it's a bad deal. Bernie Sanders on why he voted no. Let's be clear. The original debt ceiling legislation that Republicans passed in the House would have, over a 10-year period, decimated the already inadequate social safety net of our country and made savage cuts to the programs that working families, the children, the sick, the elderly, and the poor desperately need. The best thing to be said about the current deal on the debt ceiling is that it could have been much worse, which is absolutely true. Instead of making massive cuts to healthcare, housing, education, childcare, nutrition assistance, and other vital programs over the next decade, this bill proposes to make modest cuts to these programs over a 2-year period. I could not in good conscience vote for a bill that cuts programs for the most vulnerable while refusing to ask billionaires to pay a penny more in taxes. I could not in good conscience vote for a bill that makes it harder for working families to afford the outrageously high price of childcare, housing, and healthcare, while, by cutting IRS funding, actually make it easier for the wealthiest and most profitable corporations in America to cheat on their taxes. At a time when we spend more on the military than the next 10 nations combined, I could not, in good conscience, vote for a bill that increases funding for the bloated Pentagon and large defense contractors that continue to make huge profits by fleecing American taxpayers with impunity. Let us not forget that the Pentagon is the only federal agency that cannot pass an independent audit or account for trillions of dollars in spending. At a time when the pharmaceutical industry is charging the American people by far the highest price in the world for prescription drugs, I could not in good conscience vote for a bill that does nothing to take on the greed of the big drug companies that are bankrupting Medicare and cancer patients while spending tens of billions of dollars on stock buybacks and dividends. At a time when over 45 million Americans are drowning in student debt, I could not, in good conscience, vote for a bill that eliminates the moratorium on student loan payments that has been a lifeline to millions of working-class families during the pandemic. Deficit reduction cannot just be about cutting programs that working families, the children, the sick, the elderly, and the poor depend on. It must be about demanding that the billionaire class and the profitable corporations pay their fair share of taxes, reining in out-of-control military spending, saving Medicare tens of billions of dollars on prescription drugs, and ending billions of dollars in corporate welfare that goes to the fossil fuel industry and other corporate interests. Okay, so that's why Bernie Sanders says he's against the deal. These are not only is he going into broad strokes, he's laying out specifics of why he opposes it. He reckons there should be more money here, less money there. He's all explicit. His agenda is out in the open. So let's take a look at our congressman, Dale Strong, on why he voted against it. When I ran for Congress, one of my top priorities was to stop the out-of-control Washington spending. It's all obfuscation. And obviously, that out-of-control Washington spending does not include the only federal department that can't pass an audit, the Pentagon.
Right.
Tommy Tuberville said we need to do two things: stop the reckless spending and get our economy growing faster. This bill falls far short of accomplishing either of those objectives, and that is why I voted no. Katie Britt says decisive action and tough decisions are needed to finally get control of the wasteful government spending and put America's fiscal house in order. The thing that I want you to know about these two contrasting reasons of why people voted against the debt limit deal, is that Bernie Sanders is specific. He's not afraid of having his full agenda out there. He says, okay, let's talk about decreasing the deficit. Here's what I oppose. I oppose cuts to health care. I oppose cuts to child care. I oppose cuts to education, etc. Here's what I am in favor of: taxing the wealthy, bringing down drug prices, making sure corporations pay taxes they are already obligated to pay but don't. I'm for decreasing the military budget. The Republicans are hiding behind the bush because they know their real agenda is unpopular. So instead of specifically saying, yes, I'm in favor of kicking off X hundreds of thousands of people off of their health care, instead of saying, I'm in favor of sentencing Y number of people to death because of their lack of health care, I'm in favor of making the wealthiest among us, who already pay less in taxes than many of you, pay even less. That's their real agenda, but they're not saying it. Instead of saying that, they're hiding behind generalities. Oh, we've got to get our fiscal house in order. We got to rein in out of control Washington spending. It's all nonsense. It's all behind a veil. All obfuscation. None of it's real. None of it's out in the open. And so those are things to consider. And that's what we got. So we're going to go ahead and take a short break. We're going to be right back with Adolph Reed Jr. about labor politics and the South. Stay tuned.
IBW 558 is like a great football team. You've got to have the aptitude, skills, and knowledge to outperform the competition. If you're a non-union electrician, now is the perfect time to get off the sideline and join our team. We have the absolute best wages and benefit package in North Alabama and Southern Tennessee. It's because our team stands together, bargains together, and our families benefit from it. With immediate openings, you have the opportunity to see why the IBW is the right choice.
Support for the Valley Labor Report comes from the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers Union. Learn more by visiting www.ifpte.org.
The attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs have stood with the working people of Alabama for over 40 years, providing skilled legal representation for your workplace injury claims. When you are injured on the job, it can be a scary time. The attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs have the experience to guide you through the process to make sure that you and your family are properly taken care of and your rights are protected. If you need help, call the attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs at 855-617-9333 or visit online at www.mtnj.com. No representation is made that the quality of legal services provided is greater than the quality of legal services provided by other law firms.
Support for this program comes from the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 136 out of Central Alabama. Learn more at ibew136.org.
Attention union members, membership organizations, podcasters, or anyone with a payment processing need. The future is here, and your organization needs to be prepared by working with Unionly. With Unionly, your union or organization can take payments on a mobile device, eliminating processing fees, giving you a better price than other payment processing methods, while at the same time supporting a union-friendly business with a specialized skill set to meet your needs. Your members will thank you when they pay their dues at their convenience without waiting in line to deposit cash or check. Start preparing for the future today by calling 206-595-8631 or visiting unionly.io.
Are you looking for a better future, a career that can have you set for life, and to be a part of something that's bigger than yourself? If you are, then consider a skilled trades apprenticeship with the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades. The work of IUPAT is all around us, from the industrial painters who work on the bridges to drywall finishers, floor coverers, the glazers who install the glass in our skylines, and so much more. With an IUPAT apprenticeship, you earn while you learn and receive benefits while learning the trade, including a pension. We provide world-class education free of charge. That's right, no student debt. Our starting salaries for apprentices that graduate is above the national median salary with benefits for entire families. And you have the flexibility to take your trade wherever you'd like in the country to work. IUPAT District Council 77 covers our entire region, so give Adam Booth a call at 205-603-3142 for more information. Again, that phone number is 205-603-3142. Come build a better future with us today and join IUPAT.
The sign hit the city like a bolt of lightning.
You know the photo. It's iconic. Marches in the streets holding a simple sign with a simple message.
I am a man.
The I Am Story podcast explores the fight that inspired those words, how a group of sanitation workers in Memphis stood up and made history.
They don't see us as men and women.
Go to iamstory.com or wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe.
I'm attorney Tommy Sinyard. When you've been injured and need help, you need a lawyer who's with you.
Sinyard Law. You need attorneys always available to take care of you. Sinyard Law.
And keep you in the loop. It's your case. You need to know what's happening.
Sinyard Law. And never a charge to meet with us to evaluate your case. Sinyard Law.
A new firm, but an old name. One that will stay with you every step of the way.
Sinyard Law. The name with proven results.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
Labor creates all wealth should go to labor, and you are listening to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host Adam Keller. And we've got a great show for you today, folks. We're really excited about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm definitely excited to have Professor Adolph Reed Jr. on the show. I know he is a controversial guest, apparently, I'm hearing, but I, for one, really appreciate him being on the show. And as we get ready to bring him on, I did want to take a moment to share the description of his latest book, The South, Jim Crow and Its Afterlives, just to sort of ground the conversation and to let folks know about this book, which I was a big fan of. So, the last generation of Americans with the living memory of Jim Crow will soon disappear. They leave behind a collective memory of segregation shaped increasingly by its horrors and heroic defeat, but not a nuanced understanding of everyday life in Jim Crow America. In the South, Adolph L. Reed Jr., New Orleans, political scientist, and according to Cornel West, the greatest democratic theorist of his generation, takes up the urgent task of recounting the granular realities of life in the last decades of the Jim Crow South. Reed illuminates the multifaceted structures of the segregationist order. Thanks to his personal history and political acumen, we see America's apartheid system from the ground up, not just its legal framework or systems of power, but the way these systems structured the day-to-day interactions, lives, and ambitions of ordinary working people. The South unravels the personal and political dimensions of the Jim Crow order, revealing the sources and objectives of this unstable regime, its contradictions and weaknesses, and the social order that would replace it. The South is more than a memoir or a history. Filled with analysis and fascinating firsthand accounts, the book is required reading for anyone seeking a deeper understanding of America's second peculiar institution and the future created in its wake. So, Professor Reed, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, well, good morning, brothers, and thanks so much for having me. It's a real pleasure. I got to tell you, I had to pause for a second. It's ridiculous. To make sure that we aren't in the same time zone. And then I just remembered all those years of driving through LaGrange, Georgia on I-85 going from Atlanta to New Orleans, and I was reassured.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So some folks listening, I'm sure, are familiar with your work, but some not so much. You've had a long career studying and advocating for the working class. So could you introduce yourself and just talk a little bit about your work over the years, and in particular, why you have spent so much of your time studying the working class?
Well, yeah, thanks a lot. I'm not sure where to begin, although I was forewarned and had time to think about it. But I'll say this, I lived through, I was born in 1947, which is pertinent. And I lived just about full time in the South from about a year after the Brown decision till the end of the 1970s, so near the end of the first year of the Reagan administration. And I lived between Arkansas, Louisiana, North Carolina, and Georgia, and worked a lot in South Carolina during that same period. So my personal biography, I guess, covers most of what's now called the Deep South. And I grew up during the last decades of the Jim Crow order, when it had begun to unravel both internally and in response to external pressures, though none of us at the time realized that it was unraveling, or at least very few people did, and I certainly wasn't one of them. Why I've been interested in the working class? Well, I mean, Well, I shouldn't be coy. I came from a left-leaning family, so it was natural for me. And I'll tell you something funny. When at the beginning of this century, Michael Walzer, an editor of Dissent, approached me about writing something for an occasional feature that they had called "Why I'm Still on the Left," and I said, "Sure, I'll do it." And then I tried to write about it, or I tried to write it and then tried to think about it. And I realized I didn't have any answers that went beyond, well, where else would I be, right? I mean, there's in the words of, and I'll have to edit this, I guess, for radio, but in the words of an old textile organizer in North Carolina in the late 50s, you either work for the MF, you either own the MF or you work for it. And I've never been part of the group that owns it, so.
Absolutely. And, I've always said my philosophy in life is that I'm not better than anybody else, and ain't nobody else better than me. And that's just sort of my approach. And I think that really, is something that resonates in your work as well. And before we get into the book and some of the themes there, I did want to start with labor issues, since we are a union radio show. And I think, we're experiencing this upsurge, or at least it seems like we're experiencing an upsurge with the labor movement. We've got new industries like breaking into Amazon and Starbucks, record public approval of unions, and we've gotten some militant reformers elected to office in the UAW, the Teamsters, the reform movements elsewhere. So what do you make of this current moment for labor?
Well, yeah, it's an important question, obviously. I mean, look, I know there's some people out there who think that I don't want anybody ever to be happy. Right? But the reality is, no, these are good signs. These are all good signs. There's some not so good signs too, like what's happening politically, and with the Supreme Court clearly, like what I most recently in the Teamster case. The thing, one thing I've been saying for a long time now is that progressive, leftist, activist, whatever we're supposed to be, you have to stop acting like an advertising agency, by which I mean we have to stop. And although I know people want things to feel good about and to feel encouraged, we have to stop this practice of proclaiming victories at the very beginning of a struggle, right? And all these signs that you mentioned and others are good and hopeful signs. But the thing about the historic significance of something is that it can only be determined by the passage of history itself or playing out of the history itself, right? So they're good possibilities, they're important possibilities, and we should be encouraged by them as little openings that we can maybe build on and eventually get to building the thing that we actually need to turn the country around.
Right, absolutely. I mean, I think at this point, after so many years of neoliberal domination, just little openings, these little openings are hopeful. What do you see in terms of the South? What's our role, in this working class movement today?
Well, that's also very interesting. As you know, I mean, there are groups that have been calling for organizing the South for a long time. I mean, from one perspective or another, going back to Operation Dixie at the end of World War II, but more recently from groups like Black Workers for Justice and the Southern Workers Assembly now, which is an interesting formation to pay attention to, right? And it's certainly been the case that if we can crack that nut, right, then we're in good shape. Like if you want to add to the list of little victories along the way, and this is kind of tooting our own horn, but we're in the Labor Party. We actually won a ballot line for a South Carolina Labor Party in 2006, and we did it by gathering more than 16,000 signatures of registered voters in the state who signed a petition calling on the Secretary of State to recognize a Labor Party. And we worked mainly at flea markets and other places where working class people congregated, right? There's no point going to the country clubs or whatever. Yeah. Right. But what we heard from a lot of people, right, without regard to age, gender, or race, was that they thought it was about time that there was some group trying to make a political expression, an official political expression in South Carolina that focused on the things that working people are really concerned about in their daily lives: jobs, healthcare, housing, education, and so forth. And that's the big thing, right? That's the big point for us. Or for us all to recognize, like in the South. And I mean, these days, since I retired, actually a little before I retired, I've been kind of splitting my time between Philadelphia and New Orleans. So I've spent a lot more time paying attention to Louisiana politics on a daily basis than I have in a long time. And one of the things I've noticed is that in the same way that race worked for the planter, merchant, investor class at the end of the 19th century to drive a wedge between black and white workers, right? And race combined with violence and intimidation and brutality, right? It kind of does the same thing now, but in different ways. I mean, obviously, a lot of the so-called culture war stuff, does that work, and I'm often given the sense that it feels a little bit now like what it must have felt like to be alive in 1895, watching this, right? Watching this shell game, right? That the ruling class, there I call them by their right name, is trying to run on all the rest of us, but with this inflammatory rhetoric. 1895 was the N-word. Now it's kind of subtly the N-word, but it's also stuff like, I don't know, the pedophile, cannibal, transgender,
or
school. librarian.
Yeah, Professor Reed, one word that we heard last week from one of Alabama's senators is inner city school teacher.
Oh, wow. There you go. Yeah, bingo. And by the way, like, it's kind of interesting. Your listeners might find it interesting to reflect on this. Just when did school teachers go from being highly respected, right, and appreciated, to being demons, right? That didn't happen overnight. It feels like it did, but it was also the product of a long stealth campaign, and maybe not so stealth, right? With fat corporate interests who want to destroy government and public goods, cultivating politicians like your former failed Auburn football coach and others to push against this line over and over and over and over. Gordon Lafer's book, The 1% Solution, which is the study of these corporate front organizations and their moves state by state to try to poison the well of collective goods, is a must-reading for everybody who is interested in these matters. But on the South in particular, right? Like I've said, I think I say this in the book too, that people often talk about what makes the South different from the rest of the country. Why is the labor movement weak in the South? And they talk all kinds of smack about Southern culture and this, that, and the other, and natural Southern conservatism. Well, I have a much simpler explanation, right? And it's that the successful defeat of the populist insurgency and disfranchisement of over 90% of black voters in the South, but also, depending on the state you were in, say as many as a quarter to a third of white voters, kind of shifted the playing field very much in the politics, that is to say, very much in favor of large corporate interests and planters and that class, and they got to rewrite the rules of government and of politics to favor their interest and exclude everybody else. And for all those decades, that the Democratic Party, what was the only party in most states in the South, and it was an open question as to whether the Democratic Party was the above ground wing of the Klan, or the Klan was the paramilitary wing of the Democratic Party. It probably changed on a daily basis.
Right.
There was no space, or there was very little space, for pro-labor voices to be expressed in politics whatsoever. And to the extent that a quote white end quote working class was able to express itself in politically at all, it had to be entirely on terms that were defined by the ruling class. And that wasn't the case in many states outside the South, like in the industrial Midwest and in the Northeast, right? There were very few. They were very, very rare. Like the one that comes to mind is Mayor Fitzpatrick in New Orleans, who was mayor when the successful 1892 general strike happened, who fought for the workers. And by the way, it was an interracial strike, and succeeded. But he stood with the workers against the business community and the police and the state militia and the governor, who tried to break the strike with racist rhetoric, basically. But there was very little of that in the region. So when you think about 1929 and the Great Textile Uprising of 1934, there were no local officials there who weren't on the side of the mill owners, for instance, right? So like there was no space for pro-labor sentiment to sustain itself. And then again, almost all the southern states jumped on the opportunity opened for them by Section 14B of the Taft-Hartley Act that let them, declare their states as right to work for less states, which practically all all the states in the former Confederacy are now, I believe. And that made it harder for unions, right? So the fact of the matter is, people in the South want representation, want rights on the job, just like everybody else does, right? But the irony here, right, is, and like this connects with something else I suspect we may talk about later on, but the way that the ways that how we talk about race and how we talk about American politics have been separated from each other makes it harder for us to see that the move against, nominally against blacks, but it was really a move against the entire working class at the end of the 19th century, is what created a political order in the South that first of all made Jim Crow possible, right? But also stifle the possibilities for the development of the trade union movement right over the next century plus.
Yeah, there's a lot there that jumps out at me, honestly, and one of the things that is on my mind, of course, is Alabama, and you know, something I've shared on the show previously is that in my assessment, we are living in the shadows of the defeat of those populists at the turn of the century, and we are still living with the 1901 Constitution that was enacted to, you know, enshrine white supremacy and the rule of the big mules, they were called, you know, the big wealthy interests who run this state and who still run this state. And something else you mentioned that I was going to ask about later, but you brought it up about the Labor Party, you know, experience in South Carolina. And, you know, for folks outside Alabama, just for context, it's worth knowing that in Alabama, we are a one-party state. The GOP controls a supermajority of the legislature, the, you know, executive, judicial branch. We historically have always been a one-party state. It just was the Democrats for most of that history.
The right-wing Democrats.
The right. The right wing has always been in control, except for brief glimmers of hope during Reconstruction or the populist era. So as it stands now in Alabama, we have a situation where there's basically one functioning party. The Democrats don't even really exist as a viable second party. Working class people have no representation. 60% of the electorate doesn't even participate in elections. And I'm just wondering, you know, what those of us in Alabama could maybe learn from the Labor Party experience, you know, that the national experience in the 90s, as well as the Labor Party experience in South Carolina. If there's anything there that, you know, maybe we need to borrow from here in this current moment.
Yeah. Well, that's a good question. And it might sound kind of odd because, like, well, I guess the three, living people who were the most central in running the labor, or in, well, how should I put this, at administering the day-to-day affairs of the Labor Party nationally, all would say the same thing now, that it was an important experiment. We took our shot, and we learned what we could learn. We obviously at some point are going to have some kind of political expression that represents and speaks for and speaks exclusively for the working class, basically. But now's not the time to talk about trying to build one. But I guess the better way to put it is what the focus should be. And like, this is what it was like for us at the end of the 80s and the very beginning of the 90s when I got involved, was to try to build a foundation, right, within the institutional labor movement, and one might say within other working class institutions, right, such as they might be, that could eventually develop towards some expression like a political party, right, or an electoral. Not even necessarily an electoral party, right?
Right.
But the key point is that no matter what the vehicle is, it's just as true now as it was when we started, that the Democratic Party is at best an inadequate or is at best inadequate as a voice for working people's interests, and less so. And I think that's one of the lessons to take from what we've seen happen since 2016, like in American politics, right? That what happens when no political force addresses working people's interests and concerns directly, it is that the door is left open for all kinds of dangerous forces to fill that void. And that's what's been happening. I mean, our founding brother, Tony Mazzocchi from the old oil, chemical, and atomic workers, said this very powerfully on many occasions, that if we, as putative voices of the working class political interest, can't produce credible interpretations of why people are suffering and their lives are and their living standards are falling, and credible approaches to trying to correct it. We know the neoliberals can't and won't and don't care, and that will just leave the door open to these dangerous elements. So from that perspective, I think the most important thing for us now is to do stuff like you guys are doing, right? But to do it also like in our personal networks, because ultimately that's where you have the most influence, right? I mean, with people, is people in your own, networks, and trying to agitate and do worker education, basically political education about, what's actually going on, how the system works, how to think about their own interests, right? And work with people, right? And in the course of struggling with them around their own concerns. And I mean, sort of unfortunate thing mainly, but it's got a couple of benefits, is that we need to start out, I think, by saying that we don't have anything like that, right? And all the, national organizations and the publications and stuff and the political groups who purport, to represent working people's voices don't, right? And that where we are, I've often said lately, is that we're like at the very beginning of an organizing campaign, right? So what we're trying to do, what we need to do, is like start trying to, in addition to whatever else we have to do to stop the bleeding. Don't get me wrong, but we have to. But the task is trying to identify like-minded brothers and sisters, right inside, the class broadly understood, to function as a committee, right, and to keep broadening the base, because we don't have one, and I mean, well, I'll make a little plug for my friend Jane McAlevey, like in her I think it's a penultimate book, No Shortcuts. She makes a very important distinction between mobilizing and organizing. And what that distinction comes down to is that mobilizing is kind of getting people who are already connected with to do stuff, right? Like to go vote or support a campaign or whatever. Where organizing is principally about connecting with people whom you don't already know, you don't already agree with everything about, and trying to broaden that base. And what we need is organizing now, more than anything else.
Absolutely. And just a reminder for folks on the radio, we're talking to Professor Adolph Reed Jr. He is the author of the book The South, Jim Crow and Its Afterlives, which is part autobiography, part memoir, part history of the South. You mentioned in here that you're really the last age cohort to have had a real memory of Jim Crow. And I'm really excited to dig into this, but since we're on the present and talking about the Labor Party and what it means and the political situation today, Adam, you have an experience more than me about the Alabama Democratic Party and the Alabama Democratic Conference, and I'm wondering if we could go ahead and tackle that question.
Sure. Yeah. So, this is sort of connected to the racial politics that you were mentioning earlier, and that we can get into more when we talk about the book specifically. But, there are folks who lived during the Jim Crow era and are shaped by that politically. And what I've noticed is a particular trend among a subset of folks who do have like a racial first politics, and they will, I call it waving the bloody shirt, right? Just like what, they used to do in Congress for the War of 1812 or whatever, the Civil War, kind of wave the bloody shirt of the civil rights struggle and, put that out there to defend what is ultimately basically conservative, moderate, pro-corporate politics, the type of folks like Jim Clyburn. And that's representative of like the Alabama Democratic Conference, which is the Black Caucus here in Alabama Democratic Party, is very much of that mold. And, I guess it's no coincidence that tends to come from more middle and upper class Black folks and not working class Black folks. But I'm just wondering, like, what should we make of that? The waving of the bloody shirt of civil rights to defend neoliberal lame politics.
Yeah. Well, at first blush, it seems really ironic, especially for people who, know the history. But I got to say, first of all, because I'd be remiss if I didn't do this. But my friend Kenneth Warren, my good friend and comrade and collaborator, and is one of the two people I was having conversations with that led to this book. Ken always takes issue with our use of the bloody shirt metaphor.
Okay.
And I'll tell you why he does, because its origin, interestingly enough, was from what were then called the liberal the Republicans in the 1870s, who used the metaphor to attack those who didn't want to sacrifice Black rights to sort of getting beyond what they call the race issue at that point. So like his point is that the metaphor wasn't ours; it was theirs that they used against us.
Right.
But anyway, but I just pass that on. There's no judgment.
No, I appreciate that.
Well, yeah, because but he pointed it out to me when I used it, right? So that's what the deal was. But yeah. Well, see, here's the thing. Well, two things. One is a quip, and maybe the other will be a quip too. But the one quip is, when Thurgood Marshall retired from the Supreme Court, and Clarence Thomas had already been nominated to succeed him. And at a press conference, reporters asked him what he thought about Clarence Thomas as his successor. And Marshall, who was always kind of irascible, but even more so as he got older, which happens, said that when he was young, his father told him that if you're out on the road and see a black snake and a white snake coming at you, then you should kill the snake. Right. So, and if so, the other one is that my good friend and comrade in South Carolina, Professor Willie Leggett, a few years ago, looked at the political scientist V.O. Keyes' classic book, Southern Politics in State and Nation, that was published in 1949. And he sent me an excerpt from his chapter on South Carolina and his discussion of the role that race played in South Carolina politics in 1949. And Leggett's point was that just by changing a handful of words, right, like in those passages, you could say the same thing about the role that race plays in South Carolina now. But and a difference would be that Black political elites are part of the game now too. So that a way we put it, and this is my first plug, but there's yet a newer book out, co-authored by me and my friend Walter Ben Michaels, who's like Ken Warren, is a lit professor, called No Politics But Class Politics. And it's a collection of our essays and stuff over the years with 4 long interviews. But one of the points we make in that book is that just as racism has functioned as a vehicle to try to fool poor white people into identifying with rich white people instead of other poor black people. Contemporary anti-racism, right? No matter what it was in the past, but the way that anti-racist politics operates now is also a vehicle for trying to convince poor black people to identify with rich black people instead of with other poor white people. So, I mean, that's something to keep in mind as we think about, these formations like ADC and a legislative black caucus in South Carolina and its alternative in Louisiana. And on that point, I'll tell you that Leggett and I, for more than 30 years, have had a playful debate going on as to which black political class was the more reprehensible, the one in Louisiana or in South Carolina. And I push ahead sometimes, and he pushes back ahead sometimes. But like Clyburn in 2016, Clyburn and John Lewis, right, icon of the civil rights movement from Alabama, went out on a limb to denounce Senator Sanders for advocating universal public goods, right, like education, right, and calling him irresponsible. And yeah, I mean, they definitely try to pimp the civil rights movement, right, as a way to justify what's an increasingly class-skewed agenda, or an increasingly blatant class-skewed agenda that they push, and I try to call it a racial agenda. And I mean, this is another point that Professor Leggett has made, and I just mentioned on another podcast that if there were a Nobel Prize for quips, like this one would definitely win. But he said that the only thing that hasn't changed about black politics since 1965 is how we think about it, and everything is different. But when you think about how people want to talk about the stakes of black political activity now, it's always by reference to something that makes them think about Jim Crow, or makes them think about slavery, right? Which is all, and that gets down to like removal of monuments and everything else, but it's all part of a more or less conscious effort to insist that nothing significant has changed for Black Americans, politically or socially for that matter, since 1965, when in fact the reality is that everything that's significant has changed for Black Americans since 1965. I mean, it's an anecdote, but I mentioned it in the book too. Like sometimes I'm out at like a Fats or a Chili's or whatever, and see a group of Black and white, and often enough Black, white, and Hispanic, South Asian coworkers, friends, or whatever, together having a drink or a business lunch or whatever. One thing that strikes me is that that's a simple activity that could not have happened as recently as 1960, right? I mean, nowhere in the region, right? I mean, not in Alabama, Louisiana, South Carolina, Georgia, right? I mean, Well, keep on going like a James Brown song. And I mean, that level of everyday interaction where people, and I'm not talking about love and brotherhood. I'm just talking about how people find themselves in social situations where they have to try to figure out how to get along together and make sense of one another and understand one another. And the whole point of Jim Crow was to make, and yeah, look, I would not deny that Pitchfork, Ben Tillman, or whichever the one was in Alabama, I forget, and Vardaman in Mississippi and all the rest of them. I won't deny that they were sincere in their commitments to even a sometimes pornographically violent white supremacy, right? But the deeper point always was to keep Black and white working people separate from each other, and to keep them from forming the kind of alliances that the planter merchant capitalist class had feared from emancipation to the populist uprising, right? From happening again. And there were signs that they had something really to fear, right? The readjuster movement in Virginia in 1879, what was an interracial political movement, ironically led by a former Confederate colonel, I think, that took state power and changed tax laws and property laws to kind of tilt the playing field back a little bit for working people. And you had populism in Alabama was like that, and it must and in other states. So I mean, and God, North Carolina, a populist Republican fusion government won statewide in 1894, and then won again statewide in 1896 by an even bigger margin, and that's what prompted the ruling class to launch a putsch, right, a violent putsch, and that happened all around the South. So
right,
and
absolutely.
for life,
right here in Alabama, same thing. We won. You know, the people won in 1896, and it was stolen. And then we had the 1901 Constitution imposed by a fraudulent governor.
And if I remember correctly, there was one of those town coups in Alabama as well. You know, I think Wilmington, North or South Carolina, is really one of the
North Carolina.
North Carolina is one of the more popular
Michael Jordan's
ones.
hometown.
Oh, wow.
Okay, yeah. I think that's one of the more popularly known ones, especially kind of on the left online. But if I remember correctly, I think I've read about one here in Alabama.
I believe in Eufaula.
In Eufaula, maybe.
Oh, okay.
Where there was a black government elected, and there was a white coup.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and see, this is the thing I don't understand, man. To be honest, maybe you guys have a take on it. That what we understand as progressive politics now, right, is all about denying that complex history, right? Like I was on a panel with historian Barbara Fields, right, at the Southern Historical Association meeting in Little Rock a number of years ago, and my talk was about this very issue, right? Like race and the race class and populist uprising. And when the panel was over, and making the same points that we're making here, and when the panel was over, like a woman in the audience, apparently she was a certified historian, but she came up to me afterward and wanted to catechize me, not in a hostile or antagonistic way, but she wanted to catechize me about how populism failed, ultimately because white workers were more committed to white supremacy than they were to aligning themselves with black. So I sat there, well, yeah, there was some of that, to be sure, but there was also, you know, violence, fraud, intimidation, murder, which kind of changes the incentives for people.
Adam,
she said to me,
that's a very familiar argument, isn't it, Adam?
Yeah. We've heard this before, unfortunately.
Well, yeah, I'm sure you have. And then she says to me, trumping, as it were, well, there was that too. But the real thing was, so I thought, well, what kind of world do you live in where like an abstract commitment to an ideology has greater impact on you than being beaten and threatened with lynching? You know what I mean?
Right.
But what's the point in that, right? And what does that do for us? And the answer that I've come to over the years increasingly is that by repeating the claim, and this is happening more and more and more in popular culture, right? And the reinvention of the civil rights movement and all the rest of that stuff. And I think you're getting a sense of some of the concerns that led to, or that came out of this conversation that led to the book. But they all seem committed to hammering that black people never have any allies, and the only hope for black people is to do for self, basically. And that's not just a conservative line. That's a line saying that you can't do anything, and what you need, and this was also familiar given Alabama, is like a single race broker like Booker T. Washington, right? Who's on good terms with the ruling class, who can get stuff for black people through some definition. And that leads to this observation, that it's been interesting watching the so-called racial wealth gap become the key marker for improvement of black Americans' social and economic position, right? Because among other things, right, not only just closing a racial wealth gap, once again, sidestep the question of working in alliance with other people who are similarly placed rather than society. But also, and Matt Brunig's work at the Progressive Policy Project has been great on this. That examination. So, like most of the talk about the wealth gap proceeds from a formulation that the average black person has X amount of wealth, where the average white person has 10 times as much wealth, right? But the reality is there's no such thing as the average black person or the average white person, right? There's no such thing as collective white wealth, right? Like, I mean, like lately I've been saying that it's difficult maybe to think about black people like this because so much of us in American society now have been accustomed to thinking about black people like they all think with one brain and all want the same thing, right? All the time. Like, even though the black American population is larger than the total population of Canada, for instance. But maybe, so if you think about a white nurse, right, who's unemployed and about to have her house foreclosed on, or be evicted from her apartment. Can you imagine that there's like a reservoir of white wealth that she can go out to appeal to, right, to get help pass her tough times, or take a teacup to Elon Musk's house, or one of them, but ask for some rent money, right? Because we're all white here together. No, of course not. It's foolishness, and it's just as foolish about black people. And then it turns out that close to 75% of so-called white wealth is controlled by the richest 10% of white people, and about 75% of so-called black wealth is controlled by the richest 10% of black people. And the bottom 50% of blacks and whites have exactly the same amount of wealth, which is zero. So if you close the wealth gap, right, between the bottom half of blacks and whites, 97% of the gap remains, right? So what closing the wealth gap is a program for narrowing the gap that separates the richest black people from the richest white people. And I've talked to black union members about this, and they see the point immediately, right? That the wealth gap has buckus to do with them, right? And pardon this, just another digression on the same point. I'm sent you a quote from Senator Sanders before. I worked in both Sanders campaigns, and both times I had, as you might imagine, multiple experience of being approached by black people as either individuals or small groups and asked why Senator Sanders didn't have a race program, or why he didn't address black people's concerns directly. And whenever it happened, I did the same thing. I went down the platform item by item, and after each one I asked, well, isn't this, like, if we won this, wouldn't black people benefit, blacks and Hispanics benefit disproportionately from it? Right. And now the real moral of this story is that I had this encounter with two kinds of people, with working people, and every time I had it with a working person, and I'm not exaggerating here, I'm really not. Once I did what I did, the response I got was, oh yeah, I see what you mean. It makes sense to me, right? When I had that conversation with black people from the PM or from the professional and the managerial strata, right, the middle, upper middle class people. First of all, they were more likely to ask the question with hostility, but secondly, they were much less likely to be persuaded by what I said because they weren't interested in an agenda of class-based redistribution. Why? Because they don't belong to the class that would benefit from it, right? Right. And I mean, that's the key point, right? So I don't know.
Well, and another illustration of that point is that Sam Cedar makes regularly on his program is that he was on a panel with Don Peebles, which is one of the 10 wealthiest black folks in America. I think he's a billionaire.
Wow.
And they were on a panel arguing about the estate tax. And, you know,
Mm-hmm.
as you might expect, Don Peebles was opposed to the estate tax. He was calling for its elimination.
Right.
And he was calling for its
Right.
elimination on the basis of the racial wealth gap. Exactly what you said.
Oh, yeah.
He said that this
Yep.
is important in, you know, in in continuing familial wealth among the black
Right.
community. And, you know,
Which community?
right,
right? Like,
right. I mean, specifically,
where are they?
yeah. I mean, it's specifically the community of the Peebles family, right? I mean, we can say
Right.
that, but it's certainly not something. It's not something that black or white working class folks, or even, I mean, even when we're talking about professional managerial folks, you know, because the
Right.
estate tax doesn't affect anybody that has an estate less than $40 million. You know, so
Right.
this is
Right.
really the upper tier of anybody, black or white or Hispanic or whatever. And the idea that black folks should care about rich black folks getting their billions of dollars
Right.
passed down to, you know, it's absurd. In the same way that I don't think that the Koch brothers' children should get any of their money. In fact, I think all of it
Right.
should be taken away. But that's another conversation, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, something that you're really touching on here, and I wanted to make sure I mention this today, is that really the first thing I think I ever read by you was an article you put out in 1996. Now, I didn't read it in 96, in all fairness. So it was a little before my time, but
That's the year I was born.
wow. Way to make me feel old, Jacob. Thanks for that. Yeah, appreciate it. I was good and born by then, but I came across your piece. I don't remember exactly when, but it was, you know, early, you know, my teenage years when I was waking up politically, and had already seen the disappointments of the Obama presidency. And you pegged Obama back in 1996. I mean, you had him pegged. I think you exposed the kind of vacuous, empty neoliberal identity politics that animates so much of the Democratic Party then and now. And I think what you were speaking to just now is that despite the fact that the working class is the majority, the working class is the most diverse class. Right. So by definition, building working class power is building interracial people power. But there is a concerted effort to make class invisible.
Yeah, no, absolutely, man. And that's been true since at least the end of World War II. And social sciences, like in the U.S., played a very central role, like in doing that. And, like, this is something else I'm writing about now. Like, partly, I'm doing a multi-part column in a Nation about how this came to pass. But I'm also, like, the book I'm trying to finish now, that I got to get into verso by the end of the summer, is actually a study of this that we're calling when compromises come home to roost, and it's a study of the decline and transformation of the left since 1944, basically. But no, that's the key point. Like, the key point is making class invisible, right? And look, I tell you about the Obama thing, man. Like, I've gotten a lot of props over the years for having been pressing it, but I've often said that I have two mottos in life. One is that it's often better to be lucky than it is to be good. And the other is, it's often, if not usually, more important to be in the right place at the right time and pay attention with a kind of critical imagination than it is to be smart, right? And I just happened to be just wholly out of circumstances. It was unplanned. In effect, in the birthing room right at the outset of Obama's political career. I lived in that state Senate district, and I worked closely with his predecessor in the office, and I was in the middle of the fight right over his effort to replace him. So I got to see the whole thing, right? So it's not like I was Nostradamus, right? I just got to watch to watch the bullshit play out in front of you. Excuse me.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, it's clear that was happening, right? And I mean, we could see it, for instance, in other instantiations, like the emergence of Cory Booker and a whole cohort of Black elected officials who were groomed in the foundation world, and often enough in the Broad Foundation and Walmart and others.
You know, it's interesting you bring up
who are
Broad.
charter school militants. Yeah,
because I cut my teeth as an organizer fighting against a Broad Academy superintendent here in Huntsville.
Oh,
So,
here. Excellent. Congratulations.
So, you know, that's, so I definitely know about Cory Booker. That's for sure.
Okay, I bet you do. Yeah, I bet you do. But see, the thing is, right, and this says something about how relentless their concern to consolidate class power is, and to de-democratize the entire society, right? That they didn't have any substantive problems with the previous cohort of black elected officials, right? The ones who had come up through, street fighting ethnic pluralism, like in local and state democratic parties, especially in big cities. But the problem that they had with them, right, because they did everything that they were supposed to do from the standpoint of big capital and foundations. But the problem with the Broad types, or the problem that the Broad types had with them, was that earlier group of politicians, which included Sharp James, the person who Cory succeeded in Newark, what was having come up through regular democratic politics, they'd had to deal with public sector unions and with teachers unions in particular, and were inclined to give and take and to negotiate. But what these upper class funders wanted was a ramrod who would come in and operate in totally undemocratic ways and impose their will. And that's where we've been for a long time. And I'll say this about Obama too, which is probably going to make some people's heads explode, though that's not my intention. But Obama was elected telling us that because of who he was, and keep in mind, right, I mean, this is after the Great Recession, telling us that by virtue of who he was, he would address our concerns and losses, right, after the economic crisis. And of course, he did nothing. But the who he was partly because of who he was racially, right? If you go back and look at his speeches and read his sad little memoirs, right, I mean, you'll see that, right? He's got these statements about how, because I'm somebody whose grandmother lives on the shores of Lake Victoria and I have an Indonesian stepsister or whatever, or half-sister. So a lot of people who voted for Obama naively or hopefully thinking that because he was who he said he was, or because of who he was, he had some magical way that he was going to deliver us, didn't. And guess what happens? Well, next comes a guy who is the equal and opposite version of Obama, selling the same phony stuff, but in an uglier way, and appealing more like to desperation. And that's where we are.
Adolph Reed Jr., his book is The South, Jim Crow and Its Afterlives. You can get it online. It is a co-publication of Verso and Jacobin Magazine. Really enjoyed the book, really enjoyed the conversation, Professor Reed. We weaved in and out of the book, I think, and so we hit some of the topics tangentially, but it's a really good book. I highly recommend folks getting it and checking out his writing in other places. Really appreciate your time. Anything you want to leave us with before we head into our final break and pay a couple bills before we're off the radio at 11?
Please, two kind of shameless plugs. One I mentioned already is my new book with Walter Ben Michaels called No Politics But Class Politics. But more important is the Debs Jones Douglas Institute, which is the 501c3 created by the Labor Party. Podcast. It's called classmatterspodcast.org. And it's and the tagline for our podcast is we're the place where we discuss what the country would look like if it were governed by and in the interests of the working class. And our most recent episode is a great discussion with Jane McAlevey, who I mentioned before, and Gordon Lafer. That's kind of around her new book, Rules to Win By, about how to win bargaining. But all of our episodes, and that's the 12th episode, and all 12 of them connect directly with working people's concerns. So I urge everybody to check it out. And
awesome.
And we'll plug you guys too, of course.
Thank you. Yeah, I think.
And my last question is.
Oh, well, I was just going to say that y'all are also part of the Labor Radio Podcast Network, which we are very proud to be a part of.
We are.
And I spoke to your co-host on one of the meetings a couple weeks ago.
Right. Oh, yeah, that's right. She mentioned that to me. So, and my last question, you cut this, but those, can you send me a link to the broadcast you recorded, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
We'll do.
We will do that. And thank you so much for your time. We really
it's my pleasure. Thanks a lot, guys.
Yep.
All right.
All right, take care, brothers.
Take care.
Yep. All right, folks. Like I said, Adolph Reed Jr., The South, Jim Crow and Its Afterlives. You can. It's a co-publication of Verso, Jacobin Magazine. Really great book. He is he's in the last cohort of people to make it through Jim Crow, with actual living adult memory. So I think that experience is really worth understanding from the perspective of Black folks, and it's fascinating. It's a great book. So we're going to go into our last break, pay a couple bills, and we will be right back to wrap it up.
There's a lot of talk about a shortage of workers, but that's not the case with IBW 558. We have provided our customers over 3,000 workers and performed over 3 million man-hours in a pandemic year. With 8,000 OJT hours, 900 classroom hours, OSHA 30, and a state license, our members receive the equivalent of a master's degree. That's what makes IBW 558 the right choice for your electrical needs. Look us up at Facebook or at IBW558.org.
Support for this program is provided by the International Association for Machinists and Aerospace Workers, Local Lodge 44 in Decatur, Alabama. Learn more at iamaw44.org.
Support for this program also comes from the Iron Workers, Local 477. So if you are looking for contractors with lower than average EMR and TRIR, they tell me that if you need to know what those mean, then you will. Or if you need to supplement a workforce at any level for any amount of time, short or long term, if you need iron workers that come trained and certified at no extra cost, or if you need workers from superintendent down to general laborer, and you're looking to start work on a project, or you're unhappy with your current contractor situation, you need to call my friend Jeb Miles with the Iron Workers Local 477. They only work with the best in the business, vetted contractors, and can do all kinds of jobs, from roofing to steel and bridge erection, from welding to heavy rigging, from structural repairs to machinery alignment, and much more. They supply manpower on 4 of the 5 largest projects in North Alabama, so you know they're legit. If you need good quality, safe, efficient, diligent, and knowledgeable workers on your job, then you need the Iron Workers Local 477. Call Jeb Miles at 256-383-3334 or via email at local477@bellsouth.net, and make sure you tell them that you heard about them on the Valley Labor Report.
We're the nurses, firefighters, and claims representatives that help keep our government services running. We respond to natural disasters. We care for our nation's veterans, and we investigate discrimination in the workplace. We are federal and D.C. government workers, and we are proud to serve the American people. Working in more than 70 agencies across the government, we know we can fulfill our mission because our union has our back. Learn more at afge.org. Paid for by the American Federation of Government Employees, AFL-CIO.
The Laborers International Union of North America, Local 366, is proudly recruiting North Alabama workers to work construction and nuclear plant maintenance. If you're interested, please contact Donna at their training center to start the process. That phone number is 256-415-7452. Again, that phone number is 256-415-7452. No experience is needed. Free training is offered, but you must be able to pass a background check and a drug test. Local hiring that grows our community with good-paying jobs that have benefits is their mission. Live better, work union, Local 366, feel the power.
Support for this program also comes from the Mid-South Council of Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union. Learn more at rwdsu.info.
I'm attorney Tommy Sinyard. When you've been injured and need help, you need a lawyer who's with you.
Sinyard Law. You need attorneys always available to take care of you. Sinyard Law.
And keep you in the loop. It's your case. You need to know what's happening.
Sinyard Law. And never a charge to meet with us to evaluate your case. Sinyard Law.
A new firm, but an old name. One that will stay with you every step of the way.
Sinyard Law. The name with proven results.
Do you work in an auto manufacturing plant? Are you tired of taking pride in your work without getting the respect you deserve? Consider joining the fight to unionize. Auto workers across the industry are coming together because with a union, we can negotiate for the pay, benefits, and security that we deserve and can help sustain our families. In union plants, workers bargain for long-term wage increases, competitive bonuses, and more affordable benefits. You can join the growing wave of organizing today. Find out more and contact us at Uniting Auto Workers on Facebook or contact UAW Region 8 in Lebanon, Tennessee by going to www.uawregion8.net. That's www.uawregion8.net. A better future is ours.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell. How the good old union has come in here to dwell.
Alabama's only union talk radio show. You are listening to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison. My co-host is Adam Keller. Our phone number is 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. You can call or text the show. We are wrapping up here on the radio, but we are going to continue the program online on Facebook and YouTube for another hour and a half. So if you want to continue listening to the program, we've got a great overtime lined up for you. We're going to be talking about Jennifer Bates being fired from Amazon, what that means. We're going to be talking about SCOTUS's decision. It's bad, but maybe not as bad as some folks might think. Austin nurses in Texas are getting ready to strike, and the Stagehands Union has a new AI committee. Lots of stuff we're talking about in overtime, folks. So you're going to want
And we're talking to the Zinn Education Project and an educator out in Iowa. So
That's right, folks. Lots of good stuff that's going to be happening in overtime. So you're going to want to find us on Facebook and YouTube at The Valley Labor Report. Just a reminder, here's a couple plugs before we get off of the radio. As they do each month, our friends at Labor Notes are hosting a series of online trainings. If you're looking how to get involved in your union or just activism in general, check it out. This month they have a Secrets of a Successful Organizer training. Learn more at labornotes.org. Alabama Forward is having a Democracy Now or Never festival in the amphitheater in Montgomery. Shop Talk airs on 9:30 on Thursday. Get on our email list at tvlr.fm. And we're heading into overtime now, folks, so make sure that you find us. Facebook, YouTube, The Valley Labor Report. Until next week, all power to the workers. All right, folks, we're off the radio. Thank you for staying tuned. We're going to be heading into overtime here in just a second after we take this break. Like I said, really great stuff coming up in overtime. You don't want to miss it. Stay tuned, and we will be right back.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell. How the good old union has come in here to dwell.
This is the Valley Labor Report. We are still live this Saturday morning. We are now in overtime, the second half of the program where we are online only, where we have freed ourselves from the shackles of the FCC censors, which hopefully they didn't catch Reed's slip up and he doesn't get us kicked off the radio. Maybe they won't. We'll see.
Oh, yeah. He did say bullshit, didn't he?
He did. But maybe they didn't notice it. Maybe the FCC censors don't listen to the Valley Labor Report.
Yeah, we'll see if anyone was paying attention. Maybe that should be our fun new game. Like every few weeks, we sprinkle in something just to see who's noticing.
Maybe that would be a fun game, and just see how long it takes for somebody to give us a call. But yeah, like we said, we got a good overtime. But let's get to some. We've had a lot of comments in the chat, and we really appreciate everybody's comments, particularly the super chats. Strom McCallum at a $10 super chat at the beginning of the show. Western capital could not survive a united, class-conscious Southern proletariat. We will either be its great bulwark of reaction or the element that tips the scales and ends its reign. I would generally agree with that. I think
good comment.
Yeah, good comment. Appreciate it, and appreciate the $10. $5 from Hot Beef Polish. Professor Reed is one of the sharpest political minds in our times. This Yank is glad to see him on the show and supports a strong Southern proletariat. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I always love to see the Yankee solidarity.
That's right.
And I know Yankee is a controversial word. Some people get offended by that, but I mean it with all due respect. Since you did say it, you were one.
Yes.
You admitted it.
That's right.
And we love it when our northern brothers and sisters support us.
Yes, generally, I have found that most people take it in stride, take the jabs in stride. But there have been a couple people from up north who have not liked my references to Yankees. Another $10 super chat from Strom McCallum. Post-Age of Discovery race ideology in both its white supremacist and woke forms is a tool for the division of the working class and the organization of capitalist production.
Very much sounds like what Professor Reed was speaking about, honestly.
Yeah, I would, I would tentatively agree with that. I wouldn't want to go just too far with it. I wouldn't want to paint too broad a brush with that, but there is certainly two forms of a you could say a race ideology that does divide the working class, but I wouldn't want to be too broad with that.
Yeah, and I think Professor Reed spoke to it a little bit in terms of the strains of. I mean, we all know about the reactionary white supremacist strains, but there are the strains within liberalism. That as y'all discussed, wants working class black folks to identify with Oprah and LeBron and Michael Jordan and or even worse, the gentleman you mentioned who was on the panel, an actual bona fide capitalist.
Yeah, right. Yeah, black capitalism is not going to save anybody except the black capitalists.
Right, yeah, and that's where I've had some disagreement with liberals here in this state where, I'm sorry, but I'm not impressed with a more diverse oligarchy. If a boot is on your neck, it doesn't really matter the color of the skin of of the foot inside. You can put rainbows and unicorns on the boot. If it's on my neck, it's on my neck.
Yeah, for sure. And like I said, there is danger in going too far with that because even in the case of there being a more diverse ruling class, while certainly that doesn't get at the heart of the relations, but there are some even material things that are affected for members of marginalized communities when the class strata is not racial or gendered or sexual or decided by sexual orientation. I think that there is a good to that, but it definitely has its limits, and the limits are very big.
yeah, and I mean, I think. This is one of those words that's maybe been overused a little bit, intersectionality. But, intersectionality to me is just common sense and just recognizing how class intersects with race and gender and other aspects of society. It just seems like common sense to me, and just recognizing reality for what it is. But
Yes.
yeah, we've had a very active comment section this morning. Really appreciate that. And you know, apparently Reed is controversial in some circles. Here's a little confession, folks. Me personally, I pay very little mind to online controversies. So if someone has been canceled on Twitter, there is a very, very strong chance I don't know anything about it.
Yeah.
I may not know why they were canceled, who canceled them. I may not even know the person being canceled. So just keep that in mind. I stay away from all that kind of stuff intentionally to the best of my ability. So there may be online controversies and stuff that pop up about folks that I'm not aware of. We have guests from a pretty varied background of in terms of politics and beliefs. I mean, we have people who are conservatives all the way to radical Marxists on this show, everything in between. So it is what it is. I think me personally, I really enjoyed the conversation and learned something from it, and definitely enjoyed the book as a lifelong Southerner, and I think there was a lot that resonated with me.
Yeah. We do have a phone number, 844-899-TVLR, 844-899-8857. We don't have any callers, but we will monitor the lines. We did get a text message during the show, though, or right before the show started, from Jack from New Jersey.
Oh, yeah.
Jack from New Jersey says, I recently found out that my city's school district issued nearly 100 non-renewals to teachers and staff, with special ed being particularly hard hit due to budget shortfalls that seem more like, quote, failure of management to plan at all, unquote.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, the city is moving closer to approval of a major luxury condo development with a payment in lieu of taxes pilot provision that allows developers to pay fixed fees instead of property taxes like normal. We all know where most public school districts get their funding, which is property taxes for those who maybe don't know. Are pilots or similar abatements as common a problem in Alabama? I'm seeing them all over New Jersey, and they are a scourge on tenants and public schools. Also, I found out that the teachers union here in New Jersey is one of the very few in the country to have last in, first out as part of their contract. It makes the anti-teacher folks so mad. This restricts management use of budgetary layoffs to arbitrarily target teachers and staff. As you've said on the show, if they want to fire a teacher for, quote, being bad, the contract lays out exactly how they can go about it. Have a great show. Thanks for that, Jack from New Jersey.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Adam, you would obviously know more about this than I would.
Yeah, I mean, this time of year, every year for 5 years, I dealt with a wave of non-renewals from the school district. The people who were probationary, non-tenured, at-will employees who were let go at the end of the year. I hate to hear what's happening there in your city in Jersey, because that is a true slap in the face for there to be, cuts to special education staffing at the same time that property developers are getting a big giveaway. And I think that's definitely an organizing issue, and I don't know, what kind of organizing is happening in the city, if the union is working with parents and community members and coalition around that, but I certainly think that's worthy. It's always a tough thing, and in terms of last in, first out, I mean, I went through some issues with this when the district wanted to change its reduction in force policy, and so we had to go back and forth on this, and management always wants arbitrary discretion. Mm-hmm. They always want to be able to do, make employment decisions on an arbitrary basis.
Of course.
Which is why it's important that the union does fight for these rules so that there is some equity and fairness involved. But yeah, thanks for your text, Jack, and definitely keep us posted on what's going on up there, and best of luck to y'all's organizing efforts to try to hold the city leadership accountable and restore this funding to special education in particular. That's a very vulnerable population.
No doubt. Yeah, so like Adam said, appreciate it, and best of luck to y'all. But specifically, he asked if pilots are common in Alabama.
Oh, okay.
So payment in lieu of taxes.
I am definitely seeing. I mean, I think we're seeing a lot of these kinds of plans where these new developments. Yeah, I think they're called TIFs here in Alabama. A lot of them. Now, in some cases, it's carved out to where the school's share of the property taxes are still being paid, but like the city's share maybe is not. Gotcha. So it just the devil's in the details. But yes, there's definitely a lot of that kind of economic development happening here. When our politicians in Alabama say economic development, you can just about bet the bank that the company is getting a tax write-off, a tax subsidy, maybe just a flat-out check. We talked about a couple weeks ago, the city of Athens is spending about $5 million to a property developer to make sure a strip mall is built. Because, we really got to make sure the TJ Maxx gets built. And I'm sure...
And it's going to bring jobs, is what I hear, Adam.
Right, yeah. I mean, there could be tens of jobs. And maybe if you add them all up, it might make a living wage. Yeah, so, maybe like the tens of jobs that are created and the total salary of all of them
would be a living wage for one person.
Would be like adding one, decent-sized salary. So, yeah, that's definitely a trend, and I think that's something I personally want to learn more about is like local economic development and how could we do that in a way that actually puts working people first and centers the community. And I know Jobs to Move America has been doing some really cool and interesting work around community benefits agreements. And I think that could be something, that could be a way forward in terms of reframing these discussions of economic development and doing it in a way that really does benefit working people and not just handouts to corporate America.
Yeah. Speaking of learning more about that kind of stuff, Strong Towns, have you heard of them?
I've heard the name, but not super familiar with their work.
I've heard Strong Towns on a few, like their executive director on a few podcasts and stuff. And it's interesting because if I recall correctly, I think that actually the executive director, or at least at one point, one of the people who have been on podcasts that I have listened, is kind of like a libertarian-y type person, generally politically. But Strong Towns is really about structuring economic incentives in a way that is actually going to benefit the community in a better way. And so, like, one of the things that they really, really try to advocate for is, rather than giving space and tax abatements and tax breaks to businesses like Walmart or Target or something like this, that you direct that same amount of money to 4 or 5 local businesses, and that actually they have data that show that, for every small local business like a Jimmy's Pizza Shop, that is going to generate X times more revenue than the same amount of square footage if you had a Walmart in there.
Right.
And so it's better to invest instead in Jimmy's Pizza Shop than Walmart. Invest in 4 or 5 Jimmy Pizza Shops.
Right,
than
right,
Walmart.
because the money is staying in your community as opposed to being siphoned off to corporate headquarters somewhere else to, shareholders on Wall Street. And so, yeah, I absolutely agree. And,
and I actually think that I spoke to a city council person about Strong Towns a long time ago. Like, this was probably 2017, 2018, back when I was more active in electoral politics. And she said that actually Strong Towns had given a presentation to the Huntsville City Council at that time. So
okay. Well, that's interesting, yeah. And I will say a couple years ago there was another little political battle in Athens over incentives. Oh gosh, it was for like a Chipotle or some fast food restaurant, and they ended up backing down after pushback. And I remember me and another guy were very vocal about it, and he happened to be a business owner. So here I am, Mr. Union guy, with the small business owner.
Right.
But we had the same point, which is, you know, why are we picking and choosing these, you know, these subsidies?
Picking and choosing winners and
right,
losers.
Picking and choosing winners and losers, right? And small businesses in the community weren't getting these breaks that chains were. Now, and something I just saw from Strom, that small businesses are generally worse to work for than corporations. I do not disagree there. I think that often is the case. And there's like so much propaganda around small businesses and the small business owner and family businesses, quote unquote. So yeah, the small business tyrants, that's a real thing, definitely. So yeah, I mean,
yeah, absolutely.
I guess here's to me an even better solution than like local businesses. It would be, what if instead of $5 million going to a developer to bring some chain stores, you had $5 million to develop worker-owned co-ops in your community, whether they be a pizza shop or a laundromat or you know, a service company of some kind, a window cleaning service. I mean, who knows? Whatever the situation may be, I think you would find so much more community wealth building in that scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. And Strom says, you know, and when he says, about being worse to work for or not, small businesses versus larger corporations, I do think that analysis generally does hold true. And Matt Brunig is actually, you know, Matt Brunig, you're not on Twitter, Adam, but he has a lot of bits on Twitter that he does that he really likes and that he believes sincerely, but the way he puts them really kind of gets under people's skin. And so one of his favorite bits is to say that the majority of the Trump coalition was women and people of color, which is true, but it's not like a particularly useful analysis. But it's a funny thing to say, and so he says it, and people disagree with him, and then he just shows them that it is in fact true, and then they they go crazy. But it's a very funny thing. And so, but one of the things that he another one of his bits, which is true, but the way he says it makes people angry, is that you know, in fact it is better to work for Walmart than, you know, your local grocery store that is owned by, you know, a relatively well off, you know, person, where, you know, and I've seen that actually in Hazel Green. I worked for back then it was Griner's Foodland. This was when I was 16 or 17, I guess, and I made $7.25 an hour. And Walmart was built across the street from Griner's Foodland. And of course, you know, there is a certain sentimentality about like a local family-owned chain and whatever. But a lot of their servers went across the street to work for Walmart because they were paying starting at $10 or $11 an hour, you know, back in 2015.
Well, so. And also, the last point I make here on this is that in the same sense that like elites being black or gay doesn't change the fact that they're elites and therefore have a different, you know, relationship with us. Same thing with being local, right? I mean, a capitalist is a capitalist, whether they live, you know, 5 miles away or 5,000 miles away. You know, there are degrees of difference there, but a boss is a boss. And even if I know where that boss lives, you know, that doesn't necessarily change the dynamic there. Sometimes it can, maybe, but yeah. So all that to say, we do need economic development that is in a different model, that is a different pathway, that really does center the community and working class people. And how do we build wealth from the bottom up? That is, to me, the key, not top down.
Right. And the last thing that I'll say on this is just so that I'm not too hard on small business owners, which, you know, obviously, like you said, a boss is a boss, capitalist is a capitalist. But part of the reason that it is more difficult, or part of the thing that makes it worse to work for a small business owner, perhaps, than a large corporation, is that, you know, there is actually some amount of good that comes from being a large corporation in the form of, you know, economies of scale, right? So there's literally just more money to go around in a Walmart than there is in a Griner's Foodland or something. You know, it's quite possible. I'm sure that they could have paid me more than $7.25 an hour, but but no doubt Walmart has more resources to throw around than Greenwich
Sure.
Foodland. So
Right.
so that's another institution. On top of the fact that right, there are going to be petty issues with local boss, just like there would in a small boss.
And
Big
when
boss.
there's not, when they're great folks and a sweet family, that's wonderful. But being nice and sweet to you doesn't necessarily pay the bills, and so that is what that is. But I know we've got a lot to talk about this morning.
So let's go ahead. Appreciate the conversation. Enjoyed engaging
Yeah,
in it.
absolutely.
844-899-TVLR, 844-899-8857 if you want to continue contributing to the conversation. But let's talk about this. We'll open with this. SCOTUS bad. SCOTUS bad.
Yes, the Supreme Court. It sucks.
Supreme Court sucks. Let's get rid of it. There was a really great meme on Twitter that showed the Supreme Court being run over with a monster truck. I would vote for that. But specifically, what happened last week is the decision came down in Glacier Northwest versus Teamsters Local 174. And I didn't like some of the coverage before it happened. And when we covered it, I did try to not fearmonger too much about it because some of the stuff that I heard before, it really seemed to overstate the case to an extent, and there is still some of that now that the thing has happened, but there is less of it, and now that the thing has happened, I think people have a better kind of sense of actually what's going on, but. So what happened is that the decision opened the door to whittle away the right to strike in more cases. And the practical impact is that employers are going to be suing unions more often for alleged property damage caused by the strike, and that therefore unions and their attorneys are likely to be more cautious. This analysis is coming from Labor Notes. Alexandra Bradbury.
Definitely recommend that article.
Recommend that article highly, as we always recommend reading Labor Notes, labornotes.org. But they are careful to mention that, the court did not do what many had feared it would, which would be to overrule longstanding precedent that employers generally cannot sue unions in state court over activities like strikes that are covered by the National Labor Relations Act. Instead, what this decision did is expand an already existing exception for intentional damage to employer property or failure to take reasonable precautions to prevent such damage. And so the facts of this particular case, we've gone over it on the show before, but it's been a few months since we've talked about it. So just to briefly review, Teamsters Local 174 were in negotiations with Glacier Northwest, which is a concrete company, and their contract had expired, and the company was stalling in their negotiations, and so they called a strike. And they called a strike after their the concrete had already been placed into the concrete mixers, and now they did not turn off the concrete mixers, the trucks, which if they had done that, it would have actually destroyed the trucks, because the cement would have hardened inside of the mixer, and that would have been, like hundreds of thousands of dollars in damage. So instead, what they did is they left the trucks running, they left the mixer running, and they informed the company, like, hey, we're going on strike right now. And so the company, they did not lose they didn't lose the trucks, but they were not able to deliver all of the cement to the intended recipients, and so they had to dump it, and they lost that amount of cement. It was like, I don't know, less than $100,000, not very much for a big company, and so the company says, this is intentional property damage. It's not covered by the National Labor Relations Act. Blah blah blah. And prior cases state that an employer can't sue a union in state court. Instead, they have to go to the NLRB. But there is an exception if striking employees intentionally damage employer property or don't take reasonable precautions to protect employer property. This was established in a case where employees walked out of a foundry when molten iron was ready to be poured, which is, you could imagine that would be pretty dangerous. And the court found that that could have caused substantial property damage, and that wasn't protected by the NLRA. So that exception is narrow, that property damage that is intentional or caused by a lack of reasonable precautions. It does not include things like economic losses due to temporary closure of a store or factory. It does not include strawberries rotting in the field because farm workers are on strike. It doesn't include milk going sour in the fridge because baristas are on strike, right? So it is narrow, and that is good, but it did expand the number of times, the exception. And so just so that you understand a little bit more the precedent that was expanded, Jane McAlevey has a really good article in The Nation where she talks about it. And so the precedent was called Garmin. That was the name of the case. And under Garmin, if a lawsuit is brought in state court over conduct arguably protected under federal labor law, like nonviolent, peaceful, direct action by workers, the state court must defer to the NLRB's determination of whether the conduct was in fact protected. This lets the federal agency responsible for handling thousands of labor disputes every year decide which actions by workers are protected by the NLRA, rather than some random court judge, rather than some random state court judge, most of whom only hear a few labor cases a year and have little to no expertise on the field. Pre-Garmin, before this exception, before this case was established, and before the National Labor Relations Act, state court interventions into labor disputes were almost uniformly disastrous to workers and unions, Jane McAlevey writes, creating legal uncertainty, fear, and a tool for employers to impose ruinous liability on workers taking collective action. And that's precisely the world that the powerful interests who had lined up in support of Glacier's arguments, led by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, hoped to achieve. But they didn't achieve that this time. Garmin still stands, and that exception was just expanded a bit. So bad, SCOTUS bad, but the decision not as bad as it could have been. Connor Lewis, the president of the Seven Mountains Central Labor Council in Pennsylvania, had a good comment on Twitter. He said, it seems like a somewhat productive way to look at Glacier Northwest is to look at it similarly to Knox, which is an antecedent to Janus. Janus is the Supreme Court case that created the open shop across the federal workforce because the Federal Labor Relations Act allowed for union security agreements prior to Janus, which could set up union security clauses in union contracts with the federal government. Which is to say that if you are a federal employee represented by a federal employee union, before Janus, the union could negotiate, not mandated, but it could negotiate a union security agreement, meaning that if you are represented by that union, represented by that contract, you have to pay some sort of fee to the union for your representation. But after Janus, that no longer applied. It's all open shop in the federal government now. And Knox was an antecedent to Janus, which kind of opened the door to it. And so what Connor is saying is that this Glacier Northwest is a potential wedge to break open the Garmin precedent, which is definitely something to look out for. He says, it doesn't blow a hole in the side of existing law, but it invites a litigant to come along and do exactly that. So, certainly things to look out for, things to worry about, but workers still have the right to strike. So,
yeah, absolutely. I think that's important to recognize. We don't want to overplay this so much and imply that, suddenly we don't have the right to strike anymore. The implications are definitely bad. The precedent it's setting is not good. It's, I think the analogy of chipping away, seemed accurate. So yeah, I'm glad it was not a wholesale total defeat.
Right.
It's less bad than it could have been, and unfortunately, whether it's the debt deal or the Supreme Court, this week that seems to be the case. It's something that's a little less bad than it could be, and I will give credit to the one Supreme Court justice who dissented. Is Ms. Jackson, right? I believe Ketanji Brown Jackson, right?
Yeah.
Was the lone dissenting opinion, and had some good words there in her dissent. So I do appreciate her for standing up for working people, and because obviously her colleagues are not particularly interested in doing that. And I liked the statement from the Teamsters about this. I don't know. I meant to pull that up ahead of time, honestly, but I thought Teamsters President Sean O'Brien had some really good comments about this about this court case. And maybe we can come back to that, because I think it's worth reading for sure.
Yeah, and I will say, certainly not necessarily in their defense, but it is there is a Brandon Magner is a labor lawyer on Twitter who has been on the show, and I certainly have respect for his opinion. He says on Twitter, quote, "I think the smart money is to read Kagan and Sotomayor's votes as a classic case of SCOTUS horse trading. Here, probably to neutralize Alito's influence on the majority. He was instead relegated to a rather pithy and put-off concurrence." And if you do read Alito's concurrence, he explicitly takes aim at the Garmin precedent and says it should be overturned. So he thinks, I don't know if he's right or not, but he thinks that Kagan and Sotomayor basically said, okay, look, if we agree with you here, we hold precedent.
Right.
So
we'll agree to like a watered down version of it. Well, I did want to, like I said, point to the Teamster statement, since obviously the Teamsters were, party to this court case. So International President Sean O'Brien said, quote, "The political hacks at the Supreme Court have again voted in favor of corporations over working people. These corruptible justices should be ashamed of themselves for throwing out long-standing precedent and legislating from the bench. The ability to strike has been on the books for nearly 100 years, and it's no coincidence that this ruling is coming at a time when workers across the country are fed up and exercising their rights more and more. Make no mistake, this ruling has everything to do with giving companies more power to hobble workers if any attempt is made to fight back against a growing system of corruption. The Supreme Court is not upholding the law, nor is it advancing the American people. Supreme Court justices are ruling on behalf of billionaires alone, the very ones they socialize with at cocktail parties and who they owe their jobs to in the first place. American workers must remember that their right to strike has not been taken away. All workers, union and non-union alike, will forever have the right to withhold their labor. The Teamsters will strike any employer when necessary, no matter their size or the depth of their pockets. Unions will never be broken by this court or any other. Today's shameful ruling is simply one more reminder that the American people cannot rely on their government or their courts to protect them. They cannot rely on their employers. We must rely on each other. We must engage in organized, collective action. We can rely only on the protections inherent in the power of our unions."
Great comments from the Teamsters. One more thing before we move on to the next subject, and that is the topic of, okay, here's the case, here's what it means, here's some context around it. What do we do with this information? What do we do with this information as union members, as workers? And here I'm going to go back to Jane McAlevey. And before I go to her, though, of course, one of the answers is the same as always, and that's to organize, right? To build power on the workplace, in your community, and in the legislature and in Congress, and all of this kind of stuff is build power, organize, and that's always the answer. But specifically, she makes a really good suggestion for workers in the private sector where this ruling is affects you. It doesn't affect federal employees. We're under a different statute. We are under the Federal Labor Relations Act, not the National Labor Relations Act. So this case does not affect us at all. But if you're in the private sector, Jane McAlevey says, one thing workers must do is preemptively propose and win contract language that includes an explicit waiver of the employer's right to take any tortious claims to court. Employers regularly insist that workers waive their rights to sue on a plethora of issues. It's time to use employers' predisposition against court claims against them. Winning anything like that, however, will take the power built through workers taking ownership of their demands and strategy in the negotiations process, choosing to exercise their own right to strike with their coworkers. So good advice there, and she comes back around to what I said earlier. Organize, organize, organize. The Zinn Education Project is coming on here in 5 minutes. Before we get to that, though, we've got a quick segment that we can get to here about Male Flanagan. Male Flanagan, for those of you who don't know, is the union English voice actor for Naruto, which is a very popular anime. And I was looking for this. I was looking for confirmation of this before the show today, and I couldn't find it. But I believe I read something that said that Naruto is currently the longest-running union anime that's in production right now. So very cool stuff like that right there. So Mel Flanagan, the union voice actor for the English dub of Naruto. She is also a member of the LGBT community. She is a lesbian. She's married to a woman. And she had a post on Twitter and Instagram with Naruto in front of the pride flag. And lots of people didn't like it. And she didn't care. She was very... So here's a couple of the comments.
Wait, are you telling me that there were folks possibly being snowflakes? Were there folks being triggered by rainbows? Is that what you're telling me?
There were folks being triggered. Here's a comment from her Instagram comment section. Please don't bring this into the anime I grew up with. Here's another one. Little kids might follow this, and it's not a good idea. And so she replied, and there were lots more, and she replied to a lot of them. She's very funny, and she's very interactive on her social media pages. She's also, fun fact, in Not Dead Yet, which is a cable sitcom that my wife and I enjoy. But so she replied to a few of them saying, quote, "Get off my page, weirdo." Another quote, maybe you should go chill with your bros and talk it out. Another one, go away, pest. So she is not being cowed by anti-gay weirdos in her comment section, and more power to her. I loved seeing that. She's also been supportive of union voice actor Kyle McCarley in his protests against Crunchyroll, who replaced him as the lead voice actor in Mob Psycho 100 because Crunchyroll did not want to negotiate with SAG-AFTRA. They wouldn't even have a meeting with SAG-AFTRA. And she was supportive of Kyle McCarley during that episode. So very cool person. Very cool seeing her fighting with weirdos.
Yeah, and as always, the answer to bigotry is solidarity.
Yes.
And and again, as always, so much of right-wing reactionary politics is projection. These are the folks that accuse anyone to the left of Nixon of being, sensitive snowflakes who are easily triggered. But while they throw out those accusations, they get upset about T-shirts at Target or commercials of a beer or rainbow flags on Twitter. It's just really quite bizarre.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, so there we go. Also one more thing that I learned from the comments section. She ships Naruto and Sasuke.
Okay.
Adam, you don't know what that means.
I don't know what that means, and I'm not sure that I want to know. But I appreciate the inter-union solidarity, though. Yes. Absolutely. And so, I know we've got a couple more things to talk about later in the show, but I do believe our guests from the Zinn Education Project are coming on the line. So I did want to introduce the Zinn Education Project a little bit before we get to Deborah and Greg. So I am a former educator. Longtime listeners know that about me. I taught high school history for a few years, and then transitioned into a field staff role representing educators. And as a student of history and a teacher of history, the Zinn Education Project has been really, really essential to my work, and I'm a huge fan. The Zinn Education Project promotes and supports the teaching of people's history in classrooms across the country. Since 2008, the Zinn Education Project has introduced students to a more accurate, complex, and engaging understanding of history than is found in traditional textbooks and curricula. And for the past 2 summers, under the banner of the Zinn Education Project, teachers have rallied across the country at historic sites to speak out against anti-history education bills and to make public their pledge to teach the truth. The teacher-led rallies have received national media attention and provided a valuable counter-narrative to the oversized coverage of the well-funded anti-CRT movement. And I want to point out a couple of things there. Alabama, of course, has its own divisive concepts bill, which is currently moving through the legislature. We'll see if it passes.
I actually saw something that said it's dead.
Okay, so fingers crossed that it remains dead this session. And so in terms of the Zinn Education Project and some of the work they're doing, again, on June 10th, 2023, so just next Saturday is their day of action, where they're inviting educators, students, parents, and community members to rally across the country, pledge to teach the truth, and defend LGBTQ rights. And one last thing here before I bring Deborah and Greg on. I wanted to point out this quote from Jesse Hagopian, who, fingers crossed, will actually be on the show next week. Jesse said, just as the Red Scare and the Lavender Scare were used to purge teachers from the late 1940s through the early 1960s, the current attacks on what history deniers have labeled critical race theory and gender ideology are directly connected. So absolutely agree with that. And I believe we're in a situation where the Red Scare never really went away. It just cranks up, depending on the circumstances and the conditions, and we are certainly in a cranked up period. So with all that preamble out of the way, I do want to introduce our guests. We've got Deborah from the Zinn Education Project, and we have Greg, an educator out in Iowa who is organizing a day of action. So welcome, y'all. Welcome to the Valley Labor Report.
Thanks. Good to be here.
Yes, likewise.
So if you could, Greg, you start with a little introduction. Tell us about yourself.
Sure. I've been an educator for the last decade, mostly in middle schools. This is a second career for me after working in nonprofits for some time. I've taught at middle schools, Quaker High School, the College of Ed at Iowa State for a few years, and really felt called to teach, both because I enjoy working with young people and learning, but also because I see it as a vehicle to empower young people and create a better society. So that's kind of where I'm at. I mean, I'm currently a PhD student in history at the University of Iowa.
Oh, wow. Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations on that. I know that's very, very tough. I so agree with you in terms of being an educator. That's what moved me to want to do it, just to try to make a difference in the lives of young people in our community. So I just wanted to say thank you for what you do.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it's been a real humbling and honoring experience that I've had. Thanks.
Awesome. So Deborah, how about you introduce yourself and tell us what you do with the Zinn Education Project?
Sure, it's a pleasure to be here. Our offices are based here in Washington, D.C., and I'm the director of Teaching for Change, and we co-coordinate the Zinn Education Project with the organization Rethinking Schools that's based in Milwaukee. It produces a magazine and books.
Which I'm also a big fan of, by the way.
Yes, yeah, definitely. And one of those books is Teaching for Black Lives, and Jesse Hagopian, who you just quoted, as one of the editors. And we have teacher study groups across the country using that book. And so with the Zinn Education Project, we came together, Teaching for Change and Rethinking Schools, about 12 years ago now, and decided to make, really at the invitation initially of Howard Zinn and a former student of his who wanted to get resources out to teachers to teach people's history. And we put the lessons online, not just with Howard Zinn's book, but with, there are now thankfully countless people's historians and actually always have been. And the response has just been extraordinary, that every year I think about 10,000 teachers sign up, and those numbers greatly increased after June of 2020, when more people across the country, and that included, of course, teachers and administrators, became aware of the need to really not just talk about diversity or multiculturalism, but to really look at the history of racism in this country, issues of power and class, and made a really meaningful commitment to do that. And of course, as we saw, the right noticed that as well. And that's when President Trump held a meeting at the White House, and really that the proliferation of laws against teaching, honestly, started around January of 2021. So we've been both providing resources to teachers and then more recently defending their right to use them.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, y'all do a lot. And I got to say, as I mentioned, I used it heavily as a teacher. I used lesson plans. The one that really sticks out in my mind was putting Columbus on trial. We did that in ninth grade classroom here in North Alabama. I learned a lot from the resources available, and even doing this show and talking about labor history. I find your This Day in History section on the website incredibly helpful, and I'm always learning something. And so, for those of you listening, you may not be a teacher, you may not, have a teacher in your life necessarily, but if you're listening to this program, you're probably interested in labor history, right? So definitely check out their site and see if there's anything useful for you, and push along to other educators that you might know. So Greg, could you tell us a little bit about the Zinn Education Project's work for you as an educator? How have you used it, or just what does it mean to you, the kind of work that they're doing?
Oh, you bet. Yeah. And not to gush about the work that Zinn Ed does, but I think far and away it's one of the best curricular resources for educators, especially at the high school level, especially around history and labor and race history in particular. There are many other good resources that I've encountered and used, but the way that Zinn curriculum encourages students to question and think critically and think about compassion, I think is really unparalleled as far as curricular resource outlets that I've seen. So I really enjoyed having resources that I could pull from that help students think critically and empathetically.
Right, absolutely. It's high quality in terms of the engagement, in terms of the questioning, the critical thinking, the sourcing and comparing and contrasting sources. So it's very rigorous instruction, but like you said, it incorporates compassion, it incorporates justice, democracy, and that's so important for young people to be exposed to, I believe. And that kind of leads into my next question, which is about this Teach Truth Day of Action on June 10th. I mentioned it at the start. Greg, tell us a little bit about what you have planned in Iowa.
You bet. We're really excited to be hosting an event in Iowa City, responding to the call of the Zinn Education Project and the countless other co-sponsoring organizations. And I think it will be a really beautiful show of solidarity. both for the educators doing the work, the parents and community members who want the best for their young people, and the students themselves who are, at least in Iowa, facing restrictions on what they might be able to learn in school and who they might be able to be. So I think not only the show of solidarity will be worthwhile, but we'll have chances for folks to engage in action, learn more about their own school boards, have a book exchange, write postcards to educators and politicians to either offer some encouragement or praise, depending on how they're doing. And of course, a lot of fun and community building as well. We'll have games and photo booth and snacks. So I think it should really be not just a one-time event, but hopefully something that contributes to a growth of community.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm curious, what kind of feedback are you getting from other educators?
Overwhelmingly positive. We decided to organize this, a month and a half ago, and everybody we've reached out to has been just so overwhelmingly supportive. Even if folks are going to be out of town, they're asking what they might do to support, which I think speaks to the sort of hunger that people have to support students and teachers in the face of these relatively unpopular and contrived sort of reactionary movements against schools. So as this well-funded mechanism has played out in censoring schools, I think there's a hunger amongst students and parents and educators to sort of stand firm for what we know is best for young people.
Absolutely, and I hope you're right there, and I love to see this event that you've got going on, and I hope to see many more all over the country. So Deborah, tell us a little bit about why the Zinn Education Project put out this call for action, and talk a little bit about some of the previous actions y'all have done in recent years that have built and led up to this.
Yes, thank you. We launched this in the spring of 2021 when we had first put on a pledge where teachers could pledge to teach the truth, because the laws were just proliferating, saying that they had to lie to students, that they couldn't talk about the history of systemic racism, of institutionalized racism,
right,
about issues of class or sexual identity. And so the Teach Truth slogan was a counter to that, because as you said, the lessons are more about than just teaching, facts. It's really teaching critical thinking. It's encouraging young people to think for themselves about the relevance of history to today. But once they started signing the pledge in large numbers and publicly, which then the Daily Wire, a very right-wing outlet, went after teachers, started publishing their names on a list and what communities they were in. And
yeah, I was on that list.
That's right, you were on that list.
I was on that list.
And
then it was recirculated by a far-right extremist group called Eagle Forum here in Alabama, which is very active. It's essentially like the Tea Party's current iteration, and they're very active in state legislature. And yeah, they circulated that Daily Wire list along with their own rambling preamble letter to it to every state board of education member and to various state leaders. So yeah, the right wing definitely noticed what we were up to. They definitely noticed.
And you were even, Adam, preached about in a local church.
Yes.
So the preacher was like, "We've even got Marxists here,
yes,
right here in Athens, Alabama."
Yes, that absolutely happened. I happen to still substitute teach occasionally on the side, and so I was subbing at my wife's school where I knew a lot of the students, and a young man came up to me on a Monday and said, Mr. Keller, you were mentioned in our sermon this week. And I was blown away by it. And what it was is the pastor had discovered that article from the Daily Wire and I guess the repackaging of it by Alabama conservative groups. And actually preached a sermon about, the evils that were occurring in our classrooms, including, right here in Limestone County with someone named Adam Keller. And, that is, I guess, just a sense of kind of what we're up against when it comes to, because, just to be really explicit here, what I signed was a pledge to teach the truth, to be honest and real with young people about our conditions, just to acknowledge reality. And, that is considered to be controversial or offensive or radical even in this day and age. So I think that, in itself kind of speaks to why y'all are doing what you're doing. And so what are you excited about this year, having built up the last couple of years, some of these events?
Right. And I think what we should point out is that exactly as you said, what you pledged was to teach truthfully, which someone shouldn't even have to pledge. That's your job as a teacher.
Right.
But the right wing, in order to attack that, they couldn't say that teachers had just pledged to teach truthfully. That would sound ridiculous that they were attacking that. So they lied. They said that teachers are pledging to teach CRT, which it doesn't say in the pledge. We could have a longer discussion about that. It would actually not be a problem because CRT is teaching to take a critical analysis about racism. Let's hope we're all doing that. But it's not, but it doesn't mention CRT in the pledge. And literally every one of these Daily Wire and Eagle Forum statements has said that that's what teachers have pledged. So they're encouraging communities to threaten teachers based on a lie, which would sort of highlight what you said earlier, is that McCarthyism was not an era. It's still here. And so that's one of the reasons that teachers reached out and said signing the pledge wasn't enough. The media is just regurgitating all the right-wing talking points about CRT, and they're not helping to make visible both the amount of support there is for teaching honestly, nor what's at threat. And so that's why we decided to suggest that people go to historic sites and say, look, this is the history in our community that we could not teach honestly about with these laws. This is what specifically what is at threat. And so the last 2 years, people have picked sites all over the country, gathered there. We've also suggested people could gather at a bookstore, at a library, because as we know, with the proliferation of book bans, that just being able to read a book is being threatened. And this year we've got people, for example, and this is actually the second year, they did this last year as well, gathering, for example, at Stone Mountain, the largest Confederate memorial in the world. And so teachers are gathering there, they're taking a walk, they're doing a teach-in, what's the truth of that history, and they're giving out copies of a wonderful new children's book called That Flag, that looks at the history of and what the reality is of the Confederate flag. We've got people gathering in Boston at the Black Panther House, looking at the history of the Black Panthers. In New Jersey, they're gathering at the House of Thomas Fortune Cultural Center, at a Harriet Tubman statue. They're gathering in various places in New Jersey. Florida, we have, I think, now 5 events. One of them, they're folks, a lot of looking at the history and various sites, one being the site of the Rosewood Massacre, and a descendant of the massacre who's 84 is going to be reading a children's book that she's written that'll be coming out later this month. Wow. Richmond, Virginia, they're gathering at a sacred African burial ground and doing a book swap there. So people are gathering at places where the laws are specifically saying this history can't be taught, and shining a light on what is being threatened, what young people won't be able to talk about, learn about in school. The right wing loves to say that they're being indoctrinated, but really they're being indoctrinated if they don't learn this history, because young people are coming to school with questions. They see what's going on in the world around them, and they have questions. And the only way we would argue, is to help, or one of the ways to help answer those questions is to look at history. What happened before? Who benefited? Who lost? How did people organize? And then what can we apply from that today? And that's the threat. I know, as we face issues around climate change, around voting suppression, around police brutality, that's what the right wants to suppress, is any discussion or understanding of those issues.
Yeah, and for me, I think what it boils down to is the facts are on our side and not theirs. That makes them dangerous. And I think, like you said, young people have questions because they look around the world, they are curious, they want to know, how did we end up here? Why are things the way they are? And that's why the authentic teaching of history is so critical I think, to a democratic society, for folks to be able to fully participate as members of their community, to know where they came from and to know how we got where we are at, the struggles that came before us, the wins and the losses. And yeah, that's the history that some on the right are trying to suppress, to the extent that, yeah, being truthful as an educator is a liability or a danger. And so, Greg, I wanted to ask your opinion. How do you feel in this current environment as a teacher, particularly, trying to teach history, social studies, areas like this that have been under attack? What is it? What's that like now? Because I've been out of the classroom for a few years, and this has definitely escalated since then. So I'm curious, just kind of, how does that weigh on you as an educator?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Thanks for asking. So probably what is revealing are some experiences that I have had this last year, especially that have been picked up in the Washington Post and Slate, where I got kind of so much pushback from a local politician. I met with my superintendent and asked if I could teach that slavery was wrong, to which she sort of equivocated, feeling, of course, the pressure from local conservative politicians. And so that, it was really intense. And that, along with other factors, being advised to dead name students and do things that I know are harmful for young people, drove me out of the classroom, which was really, really a hard decision. I feel like teaching is my calling, but I'm not alone in that. I know,
brother, I'm right there with you.
Right?
I know that feeling where, because I feel like that was my calling as well, and I miss it. And I know that I will probably never be allowed to teach in a public school classroom, at least not in the South. Not in my home state. And that's what you're experiencing, I think, is way too common, and it's a deep hurt. It's a hurt.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And then it hurts students too, because if they're denied basic factual knowledge about history or the world, they are not as able to engage as democratic citizens. And if we want schools to be incubators of democracy, which I would hope we all do, we're really depriving young people of that opportunity and educators of that opportunity with these censorious laws, I think, right? So there's harm on many levels that's being inflicted, I think, with these sort of restrictive laws and book bans and whatnot.
Absolutely. Well, I wanted to give both of y'all a chance as we wrap up here with just an opportunity to share your message to Alabama and the South's public school teachers. I imagine that the participation in this day of action is a little bit less in the South than in other parts of the country. And I imagine there's probably fear. In fact, I know there's fear. I've talked to some teachers here who, they're very fearful of being put on these lists. They're fearful of being associated with anything like this, frankly. And so I'm curious, whoever wants to jump in first, Greg, Deborah, but if you could just share, what are your parting thoughts and messages for Alabama's educators when it comes to this issue in particular?
Sure. I'll jump in first. I would want to say first, keep doing what you're doing to the educators. It's so important, and the impact that you're having ripples out in ways that we can't see. And so what you're doing is really important, and keep at it. And if you feel like you're alone, you are not. There are many people, if not immediately in your classroom or school, more broadly, who are supporting you and wanting you to continue this crucially important work. Also to take care of yourself. As you know, Adam, it can feel sort of harried and hard on the front lines of this thing. And so keep taking care of yourself, keep leaning on one another, and keep doing the work that you're doing.
Amen. Deborah, what about you? Do you have any thoughts or just words to share with Alabama's educators in particular?
Sure. Echo everything Greg said, and then also add, I think another lesson from history that the right does not want taught is that everyone we uphold who made a difference in history didn't know at the time that there was any certainty that that was going to happen. And so I think we always have to continue the work that we know is right, regardless of whether we can see the light at the end of the tunnel there. For example, we've been sharing the book, The Rebellious Life of Mrs. Rosa Parks, which is now also a documentary film on Peacock. And she really, at Highlander Center, just before the Montgomery bus boycott, expressed that she had no confidence that anything good could come out of the work in Montgomery. She was, would not have forecast that people would have joined a boycott for 381 days and really changed the face of this country. So I think we do the work, and we have to just remember, if you're on the right side, that there are people with you, and it will seem, endless, but that hopefully there will be change. And we hope that many of you, who are doing important work in the classroom can wait it out, and that we will then do everything we can to mobilize people to support you. That's why we encourage people all over the country to show up at these events, because teachers really need to know that they're not alone. It's hard enough been teaching these past few years in the midst of a pandemic, and then to have to defend democracy. The teachers should not be alone in that task. And there is, for teachers in Alabama who are close to Montgomery, one of the June 10th events is in Montgomery at 1977 Books. If you go to teachtruthAction.org, we list all the events there. So we really hope folks can show up. There's going to be a teach-in about the history of redlining. There's going to be free books, banned books. There's going to be lunch. It should be really a really fabulous event.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's great to hear. That's great to hear. And I really appreciate both of y'all's comments there. I think, the key is solidarity, and building solidarity amongst educators and between educators, parents, students, and the broader community. Building that solidarity amongst each other to defend the teaching profession, to defend public education as a concept, to defend what's right for our students, and to defend the truth. And I think the kind of work that y'all are doing, both of you through Zinn Education Project, is really, really important, and I really appreciate it. And did y'all have anything else, any final plugs? I know you mentioned the website. If you want to just remind folks, where can they get plugged in if they're looking for an event, or if they want to possibly organize an event?
Sure. teachtruthAction.org will get you to the page where you can learn about all the events that are already scheduled, or as you said, people can pick a site on their own, take a sign, even one or two people on June 10th. We encourage people to do that. And then also the Zinn Ed Project, we do provide lessons, resources, support for study groups. We have monthly online classes with people's historians, because it really is about also respecting the intellectual capacities, curiosity of young people, as you said, and also teachers, that, this is really what gets dismissed by the right, and sadly, sometimes too often by the left, that young people are curious, they can think critically, they have questions, and our future really depends on their ability to engage in those kind of inquiries and questions today.
Absolutely. And the work that y'all are doing to help facilitate that is very, very critical. So I want to thank you both, Deborah and Greg. Greg, best of luck with your event in Iowa City next weekend. Wishing you all the best, and really appreciate your efforts there. So thank you both for what you're doing, and look forward to hopefully talking with Jesse next weekend to hear more about how the days of action are actually unfolding across the country.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you for the work you do too. I really appreciate the conversation.
Thanks, y'all.
Yes. Public education and public media, so important. Thank you.
Oh, absolutely. And we're going to stick together and keep doing the right thing, keep fighting a good fight. So thanks, y'all. Have a great weekend.
You too. Bye-bye.
All right, folks. Here's another Here's something else that happened recently. Jennifer Bates was fired yesterday.
Yeah, you know,
by
kind of
Amazon.
talking about retaliation and targeting. It was something that sort of was in the back channel of that conversation, right?
Yeah.
Is something we're all concerned about, and you know, I think unfortunately here's yet another case of where a worker stands up for what's right and is retaliated against.
Absolutely, and this is something that I either said when we opened up the show or on Twitter. But I mean, she is, I think, the second most visible Amazon employee in the union effort. I think behind only Chris Smalls. I can't think of another Amazon employee who more people would have seen and know, right? I mean, and she's certainly not as well known as Chris Smalls. I think Chris Smalls isn't quite a household name, but a lot of people know him. But certainly, I think she's got to be a second. And no doubt there is and that creates a big incentive for Amazon to try to make an example of her and try to get rid of her. And this isn't even the first time that Amazon has fired a high-profile Alabama union organizer. They fired last month. Oh shoot, I forgot his name.
Was it Daryl?
Yes, Daryl Richardson. Sorry, I don't know why I forgot. Daryl Richardson. They fired him last month under kind of similar circumstances. But RWDSU released a press statement yesterday saying that the news comes shortly after Bates hit 3 years of service this May, which is an ominous number for Amazon workers whose pay scales top out after 3 years.
Wow.
So not only is there an incentive for them to try to get rid of her because of her association with the union campaign, but also there's an incentive for them to get rid of her because she would now be among, you know, some of the most highly paid employees at the Bessemer facility. So they could get rid of her and hire somebody as a first year and pay them less. She has long struggled, according to RWDSU, with debilitating injuries from working at Amazon and had taken workers' compensation leave recently to tend to these injuries at Amazon's recommendation, according to RWDSU. Upon Amazon telling her to return to work, the company refused to make adjustments to her work schedule and work type, despite repeated doctor's letters and review by Amazon's own, quote, wellness center. And I remember talking to her. I don't think that we talked about this on the show, but I remember seeing her and actually talking to her about how that was an issue, how, you know, she has some injuries and some disabilities that really she ought to be given reasonable accommodation for, and yet they put her on the line in some of the most physically taxing work environments that they have in the Bessemer facility, as opposed to something else where she could perhaps sit down. I mean, I remember her telling me that she went from quality control to the line as a result of the campaign, she alleges. Nonetheless, back to this press release. Nonetheless, Bates returned to work the extreme shifts amid extreme pain and swelling, only to be shortly told to go home by Amazon and get a new doctor's review before returning to work. Just days after returning for a second time, she received notice that her access to the A to Z app had been disabled. At issue, according to a difficult-to-reach HR representative, was her unpaid time-off tally, for which she has ample documentation. Only after Bates' tenacious inquiries, hours on the phone, was Bates even informed she had potentially been terminated. Despite numerous attempts to provide the necessary paperwork, she has yet to hear from the company about her appeal. So this is another one of the issues that they have with Amazon, is that so much of this process is just automated, and as opposed to an actual human. And Stuart Applebaum says that this is something that could easily be rectified by a human, if they actually wanted to bring her back. If this is indeed a genuine kind of an innocent effort by a computer, then a human taking a look at these files could rectify it. But there's reason to believe that maybe the error or the refusal to fix the error isn't so innocent. Stewart said in the statement, "What is clear today is that Amazon terminated one of the most public pro-union worker leaders we've seen in a generation. Jennifer Bates is being subjected to termination by AI due to a glitch in the company's own software." Today is just another in a litany of examples of how this company will stop at nothing to stifle workers' efforts to unionize. Amazon blatantly broke the law throughout the campaign, knowing that any potential penalty would be insignificant. Today's news is shockingly just another case of Amazon's misconduct in a growing mountain of unfair labor practices, objections, and charges against Amazon. The company violated the law in the first election and did so again in the rerun election, and now is firing union leaders in the facility to all but extinguish any embers of union support in the facility. He continues and says, "We urge the NLRB to carefully review Jennifer's case when it's filed and the countless other issues at hand to ensure that no company, not even one with the bottomless pockets of Amazon, is allowed to act above the law." And that's a very, that's such an important thing that that we don't allow what has been the case for decades now. Big multi-billion-dollar corporations getting to act like the law just doesn't apply to them. And that really needs to be rectified. Jennifer said in the statement, "I went to work for Amazon because I believed in the future world of work, but at Amazon there is no future for workers like me. I've tirelessly worked for Amazon in Bessemer, Alabama since it opened. Everything hurts and it's permanently changed my life forever. But I stayed because I believe Amazon can be better, and I believe with a union we can build a brighter future for workers across the company. I've given my back to Amazon these past 3 years. I've given my arms and shoulders to Amazon these past 3 years. Now I've given every fiber of my soul into organizing Amazon these past 3 years. For them to treat me like this is unfathomable. But let me be clear, Amazon, your termination of my employment will not stifle workers organizing, for when you fire leaders, it only brings more people ignited into the movement. We are a movement, we will not be stopped, and I know my union, recognized or not by you, has my back. We'll fight this, I will not be silenced, and we will not be stopped," said Jennifer Bates, newly terminated Amazon Bessemer, Alabama worker. So very powerful statement, both from Stuart Applebaum and from Jennifer Bates in a really, really disgusting story. But of course, obviously, sending all the love and solidarity and support to Jennifer and everybody else at Bessemer Amazon.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jennifer, for your fight, and I'm sorry for what you're going through. It's a shame. And so, yeah, definitely sending our love and solidarity to RWDSU, to Jennifer, your family. Wishing you all the best in this fight ahead, because I know it's a long fight ahead, but I know you'll stay strong.
Yeah. So, Adam, talk to us about your union's fight against the robots.
Yeah, something like that. So I did want to mention this, that AI has been in the news a little bit, in particular with this Hollywood writers' strike, and it's coming up because it is one of the issues that is at the table. It's one of the issues where there's some disagreement there, because industry is wanting to shift towards AI and replace humans with robots, more or less, or computers. So my union, IATSE, the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees, has announced the creation of the IATSE Commission on Artificial Intelligence. And the commission will bring together IATSE members and representatives at all levels, as well as external experts, to guide the union's approach to the challenges and opportunities presented by the advent of artificial intelligence in the entertainment industry. As AI continues to evolve and proliferate, it is critical that our union is at the forefront of understanding its impact on our members and industry, said President Matthew Loeb. Just as when silent films became talkies and as the big screen went from black and white to full color, the IATSE Commission on Artificial Intelligence is part of our commitment to embracing new technologies. We will work to equip our members with the skills to navigate this technological advancement and to ensure that the transition into this new era prioritizes the interest and well-being of our members and all entertainment workers.
The Commission will engage in a comprehensive study of AI technologies with a particular focus on how they may reshape the landscape of entertainment industry jobs under IATSE's jurisdiction. It will also consider how contract provisions, legislation, and training programs can be adapted to ensure the fruits of increased productivity through AI are shared equitably among all stakeholders. The Commission will include representatives from across IATSE's jurisdiction, as well as subject matter experts from academia and the tech industry. It will begin its work immediately with a report of its findings and recommendations to be presented at the 2023 Midsummer meeting of IATSE's General Executive Board held at the end of July. So, just a reminder, IATSE, the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees, represents over 168,000 technicians, artisans, and craftspersons in the entertainment industry across the United States and Canada and its territories. And our folks work in live events, motion picture and television production, broadcast, and trade shows across North America. So I'm very interested in how this commission plays out, and I'm interested to see what they recommend in July. I was a little surprised. It's going to be a pretty quick turnaround, it seems like. They just announced this in the last week or two, I believe. So I'm glad to see my union is taking it seriously, and I hope that all of our unions are paying attention to AI and what's happening with AI and how it could impact our employment, how it could impact the loss of jobs, the changing of jobs, potentially the improvement of jobs, right? Like any new technology, the devil's in the details and in the ownership. Who owns and controls the AI? That's very, very important to how it's going to impact ordinary working people. So, yeah, appreciate my union doing that. Look forward to hearing the results of the commission for sure. And, you know, I would imagine that in IATSE, we are probably not as directly threatened by the AI as like the Hollywood writers are, right? Because it's easier for the computers to write a script than it is to hang a light. But that said, it impacts all of us.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that's a good segue into an update on the WGA strike. Adam Conover did an interview on the Majority Report yesterday. It's a good interview, very informative. And he said that, they're into week 5 now, week 5 of the strike. Sam mentioned that in 2007 or 2008, when the last writer's strike happened, it lasted for 3 months. And, back then, the level of solidarity, even within the writers' union, much less between the writers' union and other entertainment unions or other unions generally, was not as high as it is today. And so this really has the capacity to turn into a long drawn-out fight. If you are, that we do have a few listeners from, Los Angeles and New York. So if you are in one of those areas, then you can go to the WGA website and check out their list of picket lines. You can also donate to, there's like an entertainment workers fund for workers that are put out of work by the strike, but that are not striking, if that makes sense, right? Because because of the writing not happening, there are going to be some other people that are not going to be able to work, and they're not striking. And so the WGA has a fund for those people. Since they're not getting strike benefit checks, they're going to be getting checks from this fund. So the WGA has raised $1 million in that fund, and so if you want to donate, then you can do that. I think that's on their website as well. By the time this clip comes out, and I do want to, and I'll ask Joe to, break this up with the results when the clip comes out. But in a couple of days, on June 5th, the Actors Union is going to be announcing the results of their strike authorization vote, which is going to be very important. On June 5th. And now the strike authorization vote that's not So if the vote comes in at yes, that's not going to mean that they will go on strike. That just means that the negotiating team of the Screen Actors Guild, when they go to the table with these companies, they have the authority. The members are giving them the authority to call a strike if negotiations stall. So, there is a potential for this to become a strike not only with the writers, but maybe even with the actors. And that would, and then even after that, I think that the next negotiations coming up are with the actors, and then after that, there are negotiations with the directors, and then after that with the producers. And I think all of them are happening this year before 2024, if I remember correctly. So this could turn into a pretty big thing and just totally shut down Hollywood. So we'll see what happens there. But yeah, keep an eye out. June 5th is when the actors are going to be announcing their strike authorization vote.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of on those lines, I want to point to a joint statement that was just issued this past week with SAG-AFTRA, the Teamsters, IATSE, and the Writers Guild, all joining together to make a statement in solidarity with the Directors Guild of America. So from the joint statement, as the Directors Guild of America's negotiations with the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers, AMPTP, enter their final scheduled week, the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees, the Teamsters, Hollywood Basic Crafts, Teamsters Local 399, IBEW Local 40, LIUNA Local 724, OPC-MIA, Local 755, and UA, Local 78, the Writers Guild of America East, the Writers Guild of America West, and the Screen Actors Guild, American Federation of Television and Radio Artists, stand alongside our sisters, brothers, and kin in the DGA in their pursuit of a fair contract. We believe in a Hollywood where every worker is valued and their contributions recognized, whether their labor is on or off screen. A fair contract for directors does not benefit just a select few. It uplifts every worker in the film and television industry and acknowledges the interconnected nature of our work. We call on the AMPTP to immediately negotiate a fair agreement that addresses the Directors Guild of America's unique priorities in good faith. As eyes around the world again turn towards the negotiation table, we send a clear message to the AMPTP. Our solidarity is not to be underestimated. The Hollywood guilds and unions stand united, and we stand strong. And it, again, signed by the president of IATSE, the president of WGA East, the president of WGA West, National Executive Director and Chief Negotiator of SAG-AFTRA, and Lindsay Doherty, who is Teamsters Vice President out in Hollywood. So really think that's important that these unions are joining together and really coordinating and trying to help each other out through these struggles and these, negotiations that are happening back to back. But it's not just in Hollywood. I want to point that out as well. And this comes from an article actually by the Hollywood Reporter, interestingly enough. Of course, this being an entertainment strike, entertainment industry news is sort of following it a little bit. So an article came out this week with the Hollywood Reporter about a WGA picket shutting down the Atlanta production of a Peacock show called Hysteria. And the action marks the first time union members have stopped a production in Georgia so far. So this was written by Rick Porter, who wrote, "The Writers Guild of America has opened a new front and its targeted pickets of TV and movie productions, Georgia. Striking writers on Wednesday picketed outside sound stages in Atlanta, where Peacock's upcoming series Hysteria is in production. The action is the first time striking writers and their allies have used targeted pickets to shut down filming in Georgia. Sources confirm that production on Hysteria, which is a 1980s set thriller set against the backdrop of that decade's satanic panic, has hit pause, though it's not clear for how long. 5 weeks into the strike, the Guild has shifted its strategy somewhat to encompass both the targeted actions against productions and pickets outside studio lots and corporate offices in Los Angeles and New York. We want to disrupt as much as we can," veteran showrunner and WGA East strike captain Warren Late told The Hollywood Reporter. The Guild realizes that this is a pretty powerful thing. If the whole point is to empty the programming pipeline, the AMPTP knows they have to come back to the bargaining table. The quickest way to empty the pipeline is not to wait until all the shows are shot, but to stop the shows from shooting. The targeted pickets aim to stop other industry unions from crossing lines. Teamsters and IATSE members have honored the lines, leading to shutdowns on productions including Showtime's The Chi in Chicago and Billions in New York, Apple TV's Loot in Los Angeles, and feature films Good Fortune from Lionsgate and Thunderbolts from Marvel. Adding Atlanta to the list of targets widens the geographic scope for the Guild. Studios can lose $200,000 to $300,000 per day when filming shuts down, and multiple executives acknowledged to The Hollywood Reporter that the targeted strike actions have been, quote, effective. The Writers Guild and the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers, representing the media companies, have yet to resume negotiations. The AMPTP is currently in talks with the Directors Guild of America, whose contract is up at the end of June, while Actors Union SAG-AFTRA is conducting a strike authorization vote among its members. Its agreement with the studios is also up on June 30th. So again, that was Rick Porter with the Hollywood Reporter. Nice to see Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
Nice to see WGA shutting stuff down in Georgia. Georgia has become a big site of TV and film production, and so love to see that. Hope that means my IATSE sisters and brothers out there and everybody else in Atlanta can join in and really help shut down these productions and lend strength to this Hollywood writer strike.
Yeah, I mean, if they start regularly picketing in Georgia, and I'm not seeing it for their picket locations for the next week. I did go to their website and check it out, and I don't see any at least advertised pickets in Atlanta. But if they begin doing that regularly, then you and I can probably
take a road trip.
Yeah.
Take a road trip. I'd be down for a road trip to picket in Atlanta. So. Yeah, anyone listening in Georgia, if you
hear about picket lines over there in Atlanta with the WGA, holler at us, and we might
definitely do that. Yeah, definitely.
So we got a couple more segments. I do want to make sure that we get to this legislative update. The Alabama legislators are legislating all over us, but it's not as bad as it could have been. A lot of stuff today. That's kind of
bad, but not as awful as it could have been.
That's like a theme of the show today. Bad, but not the worst. So. And there are actually a couple of not just bad, but good things that passed, and one of those is the driver's license bill that we have kind of been following a little bit over the last couple of years, that makes it so that your driver's license cannot be suspended just for lack of payment of fees, and that's very important because that has not been the case for a while. And so there have been thousands of Alabamians who have had their license taken away from them, not because of any dangerous driving, not because they were drunk behind the wheel, not because of any of that, just because they hadn't given $100 to the court or something like that, which is absolutely crazy, unjustifiable, particularly when you think about, okay, so if they owe you $100 or $200 or $1,000, how exactly do you expect them to pay you back if they don't have a car in Alabama? It's not like we live in, D.C. or New York or Boston where there is a semi-reliable public transportation. If you live in Alabama, you have to have a car. Almost, all of us. There maybe be like 1% of people who live in the state who actually don't need a car. But 99% of us who have to work have to have a car. And if you're not able to use it, or you're not able to use it legally, you're not going to be able to make money. And then your debt is just going to increase and increase and increase.
And inevitably what happens is, of course, they risk it. They drive without the license, then they get pulled over. Now all of a sudden they're getting arrested, or they've got additional criminal charges. It's just a really vicious cycle. So yeah, I do want to say that there was some good news coming out of the Alabama legislature. For all the bad news, and there's plenty of it, believe me, you can go back and listen to pretty much anything we've been talking about all spring. But this is a good bill. SB 154, it was sponsored by Will Barfoot, who is a Republican out of Pike Road, right outside Montgomery. And so basically, individuals will now be allowed to miss one court appearance or 2 payments on their fines and fees before their licenses can be suspended. And courts can currently suspend license for the very first missed payment. So this law will take effect on October 1st. This was a significant victory for criminal justice reform groups who have made this a real, focus this year and in previous years. In particular, I want to highlight Alabama Appleseed. Alabama Appleseed Center for Law and Justice has been really on top of this bill. They've been pushing this very, very hard. They almost got it through last year, and it fell just short at the very last minute. So they worked and worked and worked to get this bill across the finish line, and it's going to provide relief to thousands of low-income, working-class people in this state. So shout out to Alabama Appleseed, and credit to these legislators for, being willing to actually hear out logic and reason and have some degree of empathy, perhaps even, shocking that I know that's pretty shocking to think that legislators could have empathy, but evidently some of them had enough common sense to pass this bill. It is less than what advocates originally sought. They wanted to make sure that people could keep their licenses if they made most of their payments for the year, and if they missed one court appearance or whatever, and it would have made it easier to have it reinstated. But there were multiple amendments to the bill to get it through, so of course it got watered down. But again, this is going to reduce the number of suspensions of people's driver's licenses over missed court dates and failure to pay fines. So I think it's really a great little chip of progress there. So that was good news. The other, I guess you could say, fairly good news would be there are 2 tax cuts coming for working people that we've discussed on the show. One of which, the Anthony Daniels overtime tax cut, which was supported by, a pretty broad group of folks, labor and business really supported it. And, like we've said on the show, it's a fine bill. I'll happily take a tax cut on my overtime pay. As Brother Joe Marshall pointed out, though, in a roundabout way, it's sort of incentivizing people. It's incentivizing the use of overtime, which isn't necessarily a pro-worker position, right? Because the pro-worker position is that you should be able to work a normal full week and make enough to survive and thrive, and you shouldn't have to get over 40 hours a week. And if people are regularly working over 40 hours a week, you probably need to hire more help. And so, create more jobs. So I'm sensitive to those arguments. I'm also sensitive to the argument that none of this revenue is being replaced. And so...
Well, they did right before they passed it. Did you see the amendment that they added to it? They capped the benefit at... they capped the exemption at $2,000 a year. Which is not capping the benefit at $2,000 a year. That is capping the income that is exempt to $2,000 a year, which is not a whole lot. And that effectively limits the annual benefit to $100.
Really? I didn't realize it had been whittled down to that.
Yeah, so So that is actually what passed yesterday. It is now on Governor Ivey's desk for signature. All indications are that she is going to sign it. But yeah, that is a pretty weird thing to say, is that only $2,000 of your overtime pay is tax exempt. But
really, yeah. That's interesting.
But you did mention that about it incentivizing overtime pay, and I saw that on the Alabama Political Reporter, and they're reporting on it, and they said that they heard from unions that it will, quote, incentivize the state's hardest workers, and I hope that was maybe a misinterpretation of what they heard from the unions, because I totally agree that we should absolutely not be incentivizing people to work more overtime. We should be incentivizing companies to pay people adequately in 40 hours and create more jobs. And we should be working to create ways for employees to have more freedom from work, not,
right, yeah.
Not creating more ways for them to try to stay. David, friend of the show, co-founder, did push back a little bit, saying that this benefit isn't enough to actually incentivize, and I probably agree with that, especially with this cap.
Right.
Nobody is going to work overtime for $100, a max of $100 a year, right? Nobody's going to work overtime to get that. It's just going to be a nice little bonus for people who work a lot, who work too much, frankly. Yeah. So I agree with that, but definitely don't want to be creating those kinds of incentives.
Yeah, and it's so it's very mild. It's very mild. It doesn't do a whole lot. It's got pros and cons, and it's hard to feel super strongly about any of it, frankly.
Yeah.
And so this is the groundbreaking bill, that's coming out of the legislature. It just seems kind of paltry compared to the great needs of working people in Alabama. We have such needs here. We rank at or near the bottom on every aspect of our quality of life. Our people are too poor. Our people are working too hard for too little wages. We have starvation wages in this state. We have corporate handouts in this state. And so I'm not going to be super thrilled. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
I'll take it for what it is. And now, on a related note, the grocery tax cut is finally happening after literal decades of pushing for this.
Yeah.
So, I give a lot of credit to Alabama Rise for this, because they have been one of the, champions of this bill. It's not a full repeal right away, like a lot of folks wanted. It's phased in. It's got some caps and protections there. So it did try to address some of the concerns about, the education trust fund budget, because ultimately grocery taxes, fund schools. So there were some, some provisions, some changes there. So it's not going to be an immediate tax cut, which also means, it's not something you're going to notice right away or even in a big way necessarily. But I agree with what Alabama Rise Executive Director Robin Hayden said, that it's a step in the right direction for our upside-down tax system.
Yeah, and and like the overtime tax cut, this is this is a very measured thing. It's not a complete elimination of the grocery tax. It's not even a complete elimination of the state's portion of the grocery tax, which is 4%. It is a gradual elimination of half of the state's grocery tax that does not go into effect if revenue into the Education Trust Fund falls below an annual growth of 3%. Right. So this is it's a very Democrat type of proposal, right? The thing about what was it? Kamala's student debt forgiveness plan when she was running for president was something like, if you
jump through 3 hurdles and check 4 boxes, you might qualify.
Right. If you are from an underprivileged community and you have more than $20,000 in student debt and you work for 5 years in a rural area with, it's
you got to
just
read
all
a damn
sorts of
essay
stuff,
to figure out if
then-
you qualify.
Right,
or
right,
not.
right. I mean, this is very much kind of in that vein. It's like, you know, I mean, a 2% tax cut over 4 years if the Education Trust Fund continues to grow at 3% per year.
Right.
And if it doesn't grow in 3% in 1 year, then that 0.5% tax cut for that year is stalled. So I mean, it's just very, very, you know.
Yeah, and I'll say this, you know, it's no secret, I'm pretty radical and militant with my politics, but I also am someone who is capable of compromise and recognizes that you can't let, you know, you can't abandon something decent just for the sake of perfection. And so I get that the grocery tax cut is not ideal, but it's getting passed, and so that is progress, and it is long past time to end regressive taxes in this state on people's food, people's groceries. So I think it's a step in the right direction. What I've always rejected is this idea that, well, you can get some modest tax relief or you can fund your schools, right? You know, like you have to pick between the two. And, you know, we'll see what kind of impact this has on education funding, and we'll see, you know, these two maybe aren't super alarming by themselves, but then you factor in the rebates that are being given. You factor in, you know, tens of millions in tax cuts that were passed last year that are, you know, we're just now starting to see the impacts of. And it will add up, and the economy will crash. The education budget has been, you know, in really good shape comparatively because of rising sales tax revenues and through you know, one-time federal infusions. And so that's not guaranteed to last. The feds aren't going to be giving us any more money like that, and certainly not anytime soon. And, you know, record collections of sales taxes probably isn't going to continue indefinitely, would be my guess. So all that to say, there were a couple of good things to happen in the Alabama legislature, and I credit the hard work of activists and organizers who really are persistent, because, and I heard this from Dana with Alabama Appleseed. He was asked, you know, what do you credit this success for with his driver's license bill? And he said persistence. We just wouldn't let it go. We kept trying, and when one line of argument didn't work, we tried a different line of argument. You know, when we would just go legislator by legislator, district by district, and chip away at it. So I give a lot of credit to the activists and the organizations that have fought hard to make this, you know, what we admit is incremental progress, but we'll take it. And I hope that it starts conversations moving forward about how we really can transform this upside-down taxation system in the state of Alabama, where, you know, the wealthy pay so little and the working class pays so much. I think we can change that. We can do better in this state, and I hope that, you know, this gets us a little bit closer down the road to that.
Yep. You ready to call it, or you want to?
I think you know, we've ran a little long today. We've had some good interviews. You know, I know we ran long with Professor Reed, so. Yeah, I'm down to call it a day. I wanted to mention again that there is the Democracy Festival. Let me find that real quick. I do want to make sure I plug that. Alabama Forward presents the Democracy Now or Never Festival on Saturday, June 3rd. That's today. So if you're listening and you're in the Montgomery area, swing by and check it out. It's going to start at 4 p.m. with the opening pep rally to hear more about the fight for democracy here in Alabama. And then there's going to be a festival with free, fun, family event, you know, vendors, music, art, food, inspiration. So sounds like a really good way to do some politics and just have some fun and connect with people, build relationships. So yeah, just want to highlight that. I believe there was a pride parade in Huntsville today as well. So you may have missed that already. And again, a reminder about Shop Talk on Thursday mornings. If you missed this week's episode, go back and check it out. It should be coming out as a podcast any day now, but it is online on the live stream. We talked to Chris Townsend about some of the books he's been getting republished, and I thought it was a good conversation. So y'all check that out.
Have you got next week's Shop Talk already scheduled?
It's sort of up in the air. Okay. I've got about 3 different guests that I'm kind of juggling for this month of June, trying to figure out who's going to be where. They're going to be good, but it's to be determined who's going to be when.
All right.
But yeah, we've got some good stuff planned for sure. Some of the folks that we'll have on Shop Talk this summer will be really impressive, I think. So, and next week on the Valley Labor Report here on our Saturday show, should we announce who we've got coming?
Yeah, sure. Why not? Yeah,
because we're going to be talking to our very first presidential candidate.
Yeah.
So
we're going to be talking to Marianne Williamson. That's the thing. So yeah, we're looking forward to the conversation. You know, I think neither of us are like, maybe Adam more so than me, but neither of us are particularly like interested in the electoral stuff. And then oppositely, conversely, I may be a little bit more sympathetic to Democrats or to using the Democrats as a ballot line maybe than Adam is. He may be more interested in the independent stuff than I am, and I don't think we have any illusions about the Marianne Williamson campaign, but there are some interesting things about it, about the campaign. We're very big fans of Harvey J.K., and he's one of her chief advisors, so that's pretty cool. And her father was a union organizer, so that is something that I want to spend some time on and dig into. I think that's
interesting.
Yeah, I think that'll be an interesting conversation and something unique that because you can, there are policy things that I want to ask her and try, and we're going to try to hit it from a different angle maybe than other like political shows. Left-wing shows are going to, because of our, intent on being a labor-focused union show, but you can go and see what she has to say about policy anywhere, in a lot of different places.
And I would recommend check out the interview with Max Alvarez with the Real News Network, because I recommend them. Period. Just as a media outlet, I think it's a great resource. And Max did have a really good interview with her that I watched recently, and so. Yeah, I'm looking forward to the conversation.
But yeah, I think that conversation about her father maybe will make us will make our interview a bit unique among kind of the other stuff, and give our listeners a bit of a different perspective on Marianne, maybe the person and the candidate. So hopefully people will enjoy it.
Yeah, and then we've got a interview with David Van Dusen, who is the president of the Vermont Labor Federation, and to me, he's one of those like up-and-coming labor leaders in this country, and he's a true militant, a real strong leader. I had a chat with him, and so we'll have that for next week's episode. I really enjoyed it, and just appreciate everyone who tunes in, likes, comments, donates. All of your support really goes a long way. We really appreciate it. And I have nothing else unless you do, Jacob.
Nope, that's it. See you next week, folks.
All right. Solidarity, y'all.